I grew up in the lowest rank of my pack, an Omega. Invisible, weak, and utterly overlooked. While other wolves experienced the warmth of familial bonds, the certainty of their place in the hierarchy, I drifted along the edges, rarely noticed and never missed if I happened to slip away. From the moment I could walk, I scurried around, washing dishes, mopping floors, and cleaning up after everyone else without a word of complaint. Because what else could I do? I was alone, abandoned at the pack's doorstep as a pup, and the caretaker wolves had raised me out of a sense of duty rather than affection. Even now, in adulthood, I slept on a cramped cot in the drafty basement of the pack house, as though I was nothing more than an afterthought. Despite my bleak circumstances, I took a small measure of comfort in the routine of chores. Sweeping, dusting, and organizing gave me something to focus on besides my lonely status. I told myself I was useful in my own way, even if no one else saw me as valuable. The other Omegas would sometimes make small talk, but they had families and friendships to sustain them. I had no one. I was the Omega of Omegas, lost in the swirl of pack life, overshadowed by every wolf with a rank above me, which was, frankly, everyone. My wolf Ember appeared late in my teenage years. Her arrival was excruciating, an agonizing shift that left me shaking under the moonlight, with raw, burning pain gripping every limb. When the process ended, and I had collapsed in the dew-damp grass, I saw that my wolf form was smaller than most, her fur a nondescript brownish-gray. She hardly inspired the admiration or respect that others seemed to command so effortlessly. After that first shift, I noticed the older wolves sighed whenever they looked at me, as if confirming, yes, she really is just an Omega. But truthfully, I never had grand hopes of ascension. Maybe if I'd grown up with different parents, or had a supportive older sibling, I could have found a Nisha warrior, a scout, or even a caretaker. But no one trained me. No one taught me anything beyond the basics of housekeeping, cooking, and waiting on high-ranked wolves. This was my world. Cleaning up after parties in the grand hall, ensuring the dining area was polished for guests, hauling supplies from storerooms, and mending rips in tablecloths. It was lonely, yes, but it was stable. I understood my place. All that changed when Alpha Lucian came home. I'd heard rumors of him from the moment I was old enough to understand gossip. Some said he was a fierce warrior, having inherited his father's formidable reputation. Others whispered that he was sharper, more cunning, and possibly more ruthless than any alpha the pack had seen in a century. He had left the territory for several years to secure alliances, taking a handful of our strongest wolves with him. That alone spoke of his capability. No alpha would risk a journey across territories teeming with potential rivals, unless he was certain of his own strength. Yet for all the whispers, none of them prepared me for the sheer force of his presence. The day he returned, the pack house pulsed with excitement and dread. Preparations began at dawn. The caretaker, a perpetually frazzled woman named Alira, had me polishing floors until they gleamed like mirrors. Nervous energy crackled in the air, the beta barking orders in everyone, from Omegas to the most senior warriors. When the hour of Lucian's arrival drew near, the entire pack gathered outside, forming neat ranks that extended from the front steps to the edge of the clearing. I hovered at the back, poised to kneel like everyone else, anxious that I might do something wrong, terrified of drawing any notice. When Alpha Lucian finally appeared, flanked by a handful of warriors, the crowd lowered their gazes in unison. But I couldn't help sneaking a look. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with a fluid, predatory grace that sent a chill through every onlooker. His hair was midnight black, cut in a style that framed high cheekbones and a strong jaw. His eyes were a startling shade of cobalt, nearly glowing against the deep tan of his skin, and the way he looked out over the assembly like a king surveying his kingdom made something in my chest flutter. I quickly cast my gaze downward and swallowed hard. I would have been punished for that brazen glance if the beta, Marcus, had seen me. Lucian spoke a few words of greeting, his voice low and resonant, though I hardly heard them for the pounding of my own heart. I had never felt an aura like his. The alphas who led our pack in the past had been imposing in their own ways, but this was different. Lucian's power was raw, an undercurrent of dominance that set every wolf on edge. You either submitted or you challenged him, and given how effortless his confidence was, only a fool would dare go against him. The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings and closed-door discussions among the pack's elites. They planned for new alliances and possibly expansions of territory. Lucian took a keen interest in the training grounds, reorganizing the warriors, pushing them to surpass their limits. There were hushed whispers that in just a few days he had already begun to reshape the pack into something stronger, fiercer, and I went about my usual business, stepping out of the way whenever I saw him or his entourage approach, trying to remain as invisible as I'd always been. However, fate had other plans. It happened in a simple hallway, of all places. I was polishing the frames around several portraits of previous alphas when I felt a prickle at the back of my neck. My wolf, Ember, stirred as though she'd caught a rare scent. Curious, I turned just in time to see Alpha Lucian stride around the corner, his beta and a few others trailing behind. My heart jumped into my throat. My immediate instinct was to lower my gaze and step back, hoping he'd simply pass by. But then he stopped. His intense blue eyes locked onto me, and my lungs seemed to forget how to work. Every hair on the back of my neck stood on end as an unfamiliar but intoxicating aroma filled my senses, something woodsy and fresh, like pine and smoke, yet edged with the sharp tang of command. My wolf suddenly howled in my mind, but not with fear. No, it was something else, something that made my hands tremble. Alpha Lucian's nostrils flared, his jaw tightening. A muscle in his cheek twitched as though he were trying to hold something back. Then he took a single step toward me, ignoring the questioning glances from the wolves at his side. My heart thundered in my chest. When he spoke, his voice was clipped. "You, come here." I set the rat aside and approached, arms trembling so badly I worried I might collapse at any moment. I managed to bow my head respectfully, though my gaze kept darting toward those intense cobalt eyes. I wanted to speak, to say something, but words failed me. "Your name?" he asked. "Arya," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the blood pounding in my ears. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing as though scrutinizing every inch of me. An odd sensation stirred in my stomach, a blend of nervousness and yearning that I couldn't explain. Then, without warning, he leaned in slightly and inhaled, as if he were taking in my scent. Confusion flickered across his features, followed by a swift rush of recognition. My breath caught. The world seemed to grind to a halt, and all I could sense was his aura, his scent, the near-palpable tension that charged the space between us. Somewhere behind him, Beta Marcus cleared his throat in alarm, but Lucian didn't so much as flinch. Instead, a guttural growl rumbled in his chest. "Emanate," he said, voice low, almost disbelieving. It wasn't a joyous exclamation, nor was it a triumphant announcement. It was more like a stunned revelation that he wished had never come. Still, my wolf reacted. Ember howled in my mind, jubilant, as though every lonely moment of our life had led to this. For a split second, Lucian's gaze held mine with a flicker of vulnerability, a confusion that mirrored my own. Then he tore his eyes away, jaw clenching so hard I could almost hear his teeth grind. He spun on his heel, barking an order at Marcus and the others. They followed him, leaving me standing there, trembling and light-headed, wondering what in the name of the moon goddess had just happened. From that moment on, my life was turned upside down. Rumors spread like wildfire. An Omega, the lowest of the low, was supposedly fated to be the mate of the newly returned, fiercely dominant Alpha. Wolves whispered behind their hands, questioning whether the bond was a fluke, if I had somehow bewitched him, or if the moon goddess herself had made an unthinkable error. Some treated me like a ticking time bomb, expecting me to wreak havoc, while others jeered and called me a fraud. Beta Marcus was among the loudest skeptics. His glare followed me whenever we crossed paths, brimming with disdain. And Lucian? For days after that encounter, he avoided me entirely. It was as if naming me his mate had never happened. He threw himself into training sessions, patrol shifts, and endless meetings, never once summoning me or addressing our bond publicly. I couldn't understand it. If the moon goddess had tied our souls together, why would he deny it so vehemently? Why couldn't he look at me without that barely suppressed rage or confusion? The hardest part was that my wolf felt the bond, and it agonized her when he kept his distance. I would lie awake in my cramped cot at night, staring at the darkness, listening to my heartbeat echo in my own ears. I'd place a trembling hand on my chest, as if I could somehow calm Ember's yearning, but it was no use. She wanted our mate, even if he refused to acknowledge us. A week passed in that painful limbo. The pack's hostility grew. Wolves who had once ignored me now sneered or muttered insults as I walked by. I tried to keep my head down and do my chores, but the tension weighed heavily on me, more suffocating than any cellar's darkness. Every day my anxiety built, until at last a dam burst in my mind. I couldn't go on like this, neither embraced nor rejected, but despised by nearly everyone. One late evening, after I finished cleaning the kitchens, I summoned what little courage I had and made my way to Lucian's office. The corridor leading to it was dimly lit, with a single lamp casting flickering shadows on the floor. My heart pounded so loud I feared it would echo off the walls. I rehearsed when I would say in my head, "We need to talk. I can't live in this uncertain space. Either reject me officially or claim me. Just do something." I raised my hand to knock, but the door swung open before I could, revealing the tall, intimidating figure of Beta Marcus. His scowl deepened the moment he saw me. "You," he spat. "What are you doing here?" I swallowed hard. "I need to speak with the Alpha." He let out a dismissive snort and blocked the entrance. "About what? To see if your little trick is still working? Hoping to manipulate him into thinking the bond is real? Don't waste his time." Rage flared in me, a rare and shocking feeling that Ember encouraged. "I'm not tricking anyone. If the Alpha truly believes it's a mistake, then he can break the bond." "That's not your call," Marcus snapped. "But since you're so set on disturbing him, let's see if he even wants to entertain you." He stepped aside and motioned sarcastically for me to enter. My mouth felt dry as I walked into the office. The room was spacious, lined with tall bookshelves, a massive mahogany desk at its center. Lucian stood near the window, the last rays of moonlight streaming across his sharp features. He turned at the sound of footsteps, and for an instant I saw conflict flash in those cobalt eyes. Then he crossed his arms over his chest, expression shuddered. "You shouldn't be here," he stated coolly, though his jaw twitched. I forced myself to stand tall, or as tall as I could while my insides quivered. "I came because I can't stand this uncertainty anymore. The entire pack hates me for being your mate, and you've avoided me like the plague. If the bond is a mistake, then tell me. Let me go. Or reject me properly, so I can leave." A growl rumbled in his throat. "You think you can just walk away if I reject you?" My lips trembled. "What choice do I have? I don't want to stay in a place where everyone thinks I'm a fraud, where the Alpha himself pretends I don't exist." He was quiet for a moment, tension rolling off him in waves. Beta Marcus shifted behind me, clearly bristling, but he didn't dare interrupt. Eventually, Lucian let out a harsh breath and fixed me with a stormy glare. "The Bond, it's not supposed to be like this. I spent years away, preparing to lead this pack, forging alliances to make us stronger. Everyone expected me to mate with a she-wolf from a line of strong alphas, or at least a respectable beta family. Instead, I come home, and the moment I cross your path, the bond snaps into place." He paused, his frustration raw. "What am I supposed to do with that? You're an Omega. Your body can barely handle shifting. How are you going to be Luna to a pack that needs strength in its leadership?" Even though I expected his doubts, the bluntness stung. "You think I want this?" My voice trembled. "All my life, I've been alone. I never asked for your attention or your bond. But the moon goddess doesn't make mistakes, or at least that's what we're taught." He exhaled sharply, and for a heartbeat, vulnerability flickered in his eyes. Then he turned away, refusing to look at me. "I don't have an answer yet," he said, voice hushed. "But don't provoke me by talking about leaving. You're under my protection as long as you're in my territory. That's all I can offer right now." His words were neither acceptance nor outright rejection. They left me in the same limbo I'd been in, only now it was clear he was determined to keep me somewhere in his life, even if he refused to hold me close. That realization both comforted and hurt me. Before I could muster a response, Beta Marcus cleared his throat, clearly dismissing me. "Arya," he said, voice dripping with condescension. "I think you've occupied enough of the Alpha's time. Go on. Get out of here." I clenched my fists, swallowing the retort that threatened to escape. Silently, I turned and walked out, feeling Lucian's gaze bore into my back as I left. The tension in that office weighed me down, and I hardly slept that night, replaying his words over and over in my head. So he wasn't going to reject me yet, but he wasn't ready to claim me either. In the days that followed, my status as the Omega who might be the Alpha's mate left me in a precarious, miserable position. Some pack members began outright taunting me, accusing me of seducing Lucian with unnatural powers. Others tried to corner me when I was alone in the storage rooms or the far reaches of the pack house. On more than one occasion, I narrowly escaped a beating by slipping away at the last second. My meager wolf instincts told me to hide, to cower, but a spark of pride, the same spark that made me confront Lucian, forced me to stand straighter and refuse to be bullied, even if I ended up trembling from burr. Fear once I was out of sight. The tension boiled over one night when I was returning from a run to gather supplies outside the pack's territory. I'd managed to scrounge up some discounted cleaning solutions from a neighboring human town, hoping to impress the caretaker, Elira, so she would go easier on me. By the time I reached the pack house's rear entrance, the sky was draped in stars and a waning moon. My mind was lost in thoughts of how to endure another day in this environment. Suddenly, I sensed multiple presences behind me. My wolf perked up, hackles rising, and I spun to find 3 young warriors closing in. One was Jonah, a tall male whose sneer made my blood run cold, and the others were a pair of siblings known for their sadistic streak. Their eyes gleamed in the moonlight, full of unmasked hostility. "You think you can just waltz around here like you're something special now, huh?" Jonah growled, stepping forward. He shoved my shoulder hard enough to make me stumble. I dropped the supplies, and they clattered on the ground, rolling underfoot. I bit my lip, heart racing. I don't think I'm special. Just to stop lying," one of the siblings hissed. "You're an Omega. You're the lowest rank. There's no way the moon goddess would pair you with our Alpha, unless you bewitched him." Jonah snorted a cruel laugh. "Let's just teach her a lesson. Maybe if we knock some sense into her, she'll give up this ridiculous act and run off like the worthless stray she is." I glanced around desperately, but we were alone. There would be no one to hear me scream if I tried to cry for help. Ember bristled, urging me to stand my ground. But what could I do against 3 trained warriors? My wolf and I were no match for them. Fear coiled in my stomach like a snake preparing to strike. Before I could react, Jonah lunged and slammed me against the exterior wall of the pack house. My head hit the stone, and pain ricocheted through my skull, tears springing to my eyes. The siblings closed in on either side, a triumphant malice shining in their eyes. My throat constricted, and I tried to push Jonah away, but he pinned my arms above my head. "See, Omega, this is where you belong under our control," he snarled. Just as I thought I might faint from the pounding in my head, a bone-rattling roar ripped through the night air. Jonah froze, horror transforming his features. We all turned to see Alpha Lucian striding toward us, eyes blazing with fury so potent it made my heart skip. He didn't waste time with words. Before Jonah could fully let go of me, Lucian's fist collided with his jaw, sending him sprawling. The siblings backed off, eyes wide with terror. Lucian's canines were bared, and I could see the faint ripple of muscle beneath his shirt, as though his wolf was straining to emerge. "Touch her again," he snarled, voice rumbling with lethal promise, "and I'll tear your throats out. All of you." Jonah staggered to his feet, blood dripping from his split lip. "Alpha, leave," Lucian thundered. His command drenched the air in absolute authority. The 3 warriors didn't hesitate. They bolted as fast as their legs could carry them, leaving me trembling and gasping for breath against the wall. For a heartbeat, Lucian just stood there, chest heaving, the raw power of his aura making the night itself feel heavier. Then he turned to me, the raging storm in his eyes dimming slightly when he noticed I was hurt. "Arya," he said, voice rough. He stepped closer, gently cradling my jaw with one hand while he inspected the bruises forming on my arms. His touch was surprisingly gentle, sending a jolt of warmth through me, despite the pain throbbing behind my eyes. "You're hurt." I winced. "Ayune okay. Just a bump." A frustrated growl rumbled in his throat. Without warning, he slipped an arm under my knees and lifted me against his chest as though I weighed nothing. I let out a startled gasp, arms flailing for a second before I grabbed onto his shoulders, my face blazing in embarrassment. He carried me into the pack house, ignoring the astonished looks of a few onlookers who crossed our path. My heart pounded erratically, not just from fear, but from the closeness of his scent, the firm press of his body. Ember whined in my mind, longing for more. desperate to bury herself in his warmth. Yet I couldn't ignore the guilt and confusion swirling in my chest. He had saved me again, but I still didn't know where we stood. He brought me to the infirmary, which was thankfully empty at that hour, and set me gently on a small cot. Hovering over me, he brushed stray hair from my forehead, his calloused fingers leaving a trail of tingling awareness. Under the bright overhead lights, I saw the flecks of gold in his irises, the tension in his clenched jaw, and the raw concern carved into his features. "Tell me where it hurts," he demanded, voice quieter now. I touched the side of my head gingerly. "Here. It's nothing too bad, just throbbing. I'll be fine in the morning." Lucian examined the spot, brow furrowing at the raised lump. He cursed under his breath and vanished into a cabinet, returning with a cold pack which he pressed to my temple. I hissed at the sudden chill, but a moment later the sharp ache lessened. Silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken words. Finally, I cleared my throat. "Thank you for helping me." His grip on the cold pack tightened. "I don't do it out of pity," he said, eyes flickering with emotion. "Whether I like it or not, you're my mate. I protect what's mine." A surge of conflicting feelings flooded me. The possessive tone in his voice ignited a small flutter of hope. He might be in denial, but his instincts wouldn't let him abandon me. Still, my heart ached at the knowledge that I was merely something he felt obligated to keep safe, a duty, rather than a partner he chose willingly. "You say that, but you won't even look at me most days," I whispered. "The pack treats me like a joke. They think I'm lying about the bond, and you do nothing to fix that impression." He inhaled sharply, standing straight so he towered over me. "I know," he said grimly. "But you don't understand the pressure I'm under. The alliance negotiations. The threat from rival packs say everything is riding on my leadership. I can't just bring an Omega forward as my mate and expect everyone to instantly accept it. They'd see it as a sign of weakness." "Oh." Pain lanced through me. "So I'm a liability." He hesitated, and the pause told me enough. After a moment, he gently placed the cold pack beside me and ran a hand through his dark hair. "I don't want you hurt, Arya. That's the last thing I want. But I also don't know how to make the pack respect an Omega as Luna. They need someone strong, someone they can rely on if another pack challenges us." Tears burned at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them back. "I might be weak compared to you, but that doesn't mean I don't have strength of my own. You've never given me a chance to show it." He exhaled, conflict etched in every line of his face. "I'll figure something out," he murmured, though he sounded more like he was trying to convince himself. "But for now, you need to rest. I'll post guards to make sure no one dares touch you again." "Guards?" I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping me. "So I'm to be a prisoner here?" His eyes flashed. "Better a guarded prisoner than a victim. I won't let them lay a finger on you." I didn't have the will to argue anymore. My head throbbed, and my emotions were in turmoil. I lay back against the pillow, nodding numbly. "Fine," I whispered. Lucian stood there for a moment, as though debating whether to say more. Then he turned on his heel and left the infirmary, footsteps echoing down the corridor until all was silent. I stared at the ceiling, tears slipping down my temples, my mind a storm of confusion. I was apparently precious enough to him that he'd fight off anyone who threatened me, yet not precious enough to claim openly. My wolf whined, echoing my pain. That night, as I dozed fitfully, I thought I sensed Lucian's presence just beyond the doorway, heard the faint sound of him pacing like a restless caged animal. Maybe it was a dream, or maybe my wolf caught the truth. All I knew was that by the time dawn broke, he was gone, and a solemn-faced guard stood outside to escort me back to my usual tasks. So began a strange period in my life. The Omega under the Alpha's protection, a mate he refused to claim. The guard dogs, as some of the other Omegas mockingly referred to them, followed me around everywhere, ensuring that no one would lay a hand on me. But their presence also stoked resentment. Wolves who already disliked me now loathed me for having special treatment while doing my chores. Their scowls, their whispers, that was my new normal. Yea, beneath all that misery, I sensed something shifting in Lucian. He might keep his distance, but I knew that whenever I was cornered or threatened, he was never far, always stepping in at the last second to shield me. And in those moments, my heart clenched with both gratitude and heartbreak. He was torn, fighting between duty, desire, and the need to appear strong to the pack. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't even know if I'd survive the next confrontation. But one thing had become crystal clear. The moon goddess had bound me to an Alpha who was at war with himself. And despite all the pain, a treacherous part of me wished he would choose me, Omega, though I was so we could stand against the world together. Because deep in the recesses of my mind, in that lonely corner where I nurtured my hopes, I believed that if he only let me in, I could be strong enough for both of us. The days following that late-night attack felt surreal. My entire life within the pack house transformed in subtle yet undeniable ways. On the surface, I was still the Omega who performed menial tasks, scrubbing floors, washing linens, and preparing meals in the kitchen under the caretaker's relentless gaze. But the presence of Lucian's guards hovering in every corner added a new dimension to my routine. No one dared to openly assault me anymore, yet hostility seethed beneath the surface. Whispers followed me wherever I went. If I paused too long in the hallway, I might catch the tail end of snickers or accusations that I had seduced Lucian into protecting me. Each morning, I awoke with a sense of dread and possibility. Dread, because I knew the pack disapproved of me, resented me, and might still try to drive me out if Lucian let down his guard for even a moment. Possibility, because at least now I had glimpses of a life beyond mere invisibility, glimpses that fed the spark of hope in my chest every time Lucian intervened to shield me from harassment, or every time I sensed him in the distance, half watching me with that guarded expression. My wolf leapt with cautious excitement. He was wrestling with the bond, there was no denying that. Sometimes I'd see him glowering at me from across the training grounds or in the pack house foyer, his cobalt eyes reflecting a tumult of emotions. And each time, I didn't know whether to approach him or shrink away. He was the Alpha, unpredictable and full of scorching rage when provoked. But somewhere in that chaos, I also sensed longing. Despite the beta's openly hostile presence, a few members of the pack showed me small kindnesses. Lena, an Omega close to my age, dropped by my cot late one night. She brought with her a blanket and a bit of leftover stew she'd managed to salvage from dinner. I had just returned from a grueling day of chores, my muscles aching from scrubbing the courtyard tiles. The moment she entered the basement, I sat up, blinking in surprise. "Lena?" I said, voice scratchy from exhaustion. "What are you doing here?" Her eyes darted around nervously, as though she expected someone to burst in at any moment. I wanted to see how you're holding up. I know it can't be easy for you right now." She sat beside me on the edge of my cot and offered the bowl of stew. The warmth of the stew in my hands was a revelation and I realized with a pang that I couldn't remember the last time I'd eaten something fresh and hot without being too tense or preoccupied to taste it. "Thank you," I whispered, taking a careful sip. It was rich and comforting, and for the first time in ages, a sense of normalcy washed over me. Lena fiddled with the frayed edge of her shirt. You should be careful, you know? The beta is riling people up, and some of the younger wolves are susceptible to his influence." I grimaced, recalling the savage glee in Jonah's eyes the night he attacked me. "I know. I don't want to cause trouble, but it's not like I asked for this bond." She cast a sympathetic glance at me. "No one chooses the bond. Arya, that's the moon goddess's domain. But I guess some are just finding it hard to believe she'd pair an alpha with an omega. It's never happened in our pack before. Most pairs fall within similar ranks. The alpha almost always mates with someone from a beta or gamma family, so the leadership lineage remains strong." Tears prickled at the corners of my eyes, but I quickly blinked them away. "Maybe it was a mistake," I said softly, though a pang tore at my chest from even suggesting it. Lena placed a warm hand on my shoulder. "I don't think the moon goddess makes mistakes, but I do think we often don't understand her plan until much later." I offered her a weak smile, grateful for the supportive words. She left shortly after, reminding me to eat and rest as much as I could. As I finished the stew, I couldn't help replaying her words in my mind. We don't understand her plan until much later. Was there truly a purpose in bonding an omega like me to an alpha like Lucian? If so, what was it? The next day, as the sun reached its zenith, I was scrubbing a series of tall windows in the main hallway. The bright rays illuminated every speck of dust, and I focused on my task, trying to silence my tumultuous thoughts. While I worked, I heard footsteps behind me. My wolf tensed, anticipating trouble, but I slowly turned to see a young warrior named Cade. He was known to be level-headed, not prone to bullying, though he had never particularly paid me any attention before. He paused a few paces away, seeming uncertain. "Arya," he ventured, voice careful. "Do you have a moment?" Wiping sweat from my brow, I nodded, though my heart pounded nervously. "Yes, of course." He cleared his throat. I wanted to say that I'm sorry about what some of the others have been doing. The taunts, the attacks. I don't think it's right." Relief washed over me, along with a flicker of gratitude. "Thank you. That means a lot." Cade shifted from foot to foot. "And, well, I'd like you to know that if you ever need help, you can call on me." He looked genuinely sincere, though embarrassment tinged his cheeks. Some of us see that the alpha isn't just protecting you because of a whim. The bond is real. If the moon goddess chose you, then it's not our place to question it. Emotion welled up in my chest. The mere fact that someone besides Lena believed me was enough to make my throat tighten. "Thank you, Cade. Truly." He offered me a half smile and nodded. Then, as if worried about being seen fraternizing with me for too long, he hurried down the corridor. I stood there, heart lighter than it had been in days. Perhaps not everyone in the pack was against me. Perhaps there was a chance I could earn their respect, piece by piece. That afternoon, I decided I couldn't hide in fear or frustration anymore. If I was going to be a mate worthy of respect, worthy of Lucian, if he ever decided to claim me, I needed to learn how to defend myself. It was a daunting thought, considering my wolf was smaller and weaker than most. But it was better than being a perpetual victim, Summoning the courage that had slowly been building within me, I made my way to the training grounds, where the warriors typically sparred and honed their combat skills. The sight that greeted me was intimidating. Rows of muscular wolves in human form, practicing martial techniques or grappling in pairs on a patch of well-trodden earth. Others shifted into their wolf forms, running laps or working on coordinated maneuvers. Overseen by a couple of high-ranking warriors, the training was strict and disciplined. I stood at the edge of the field for several minutes, debating whether to step forward. My stomach churned with nerves. What if they all laughed at me? What if they refused to teach me? Eventually, I mustered my nerve and approached one of the instructors, a stern-faced older gamma named Ingrid. She had short graying hair and sharp eyes that didn't miss a detail. Her arms were corded with muscle, a testament to decades of fighting. She eyed me with surprise as I drew near. "I want to train," I said, proud that my voice didn't waver. She wiped sweat from her brow and looked me over, from my threadbare shoes to my trembling hands. "Train?" she repeated, arching an eyebrow. "You're the Omega who's been causing such a stir, aren't you?" Heat flooded my cheeks, but I didn't look away. "Yes," I said quietly, "and I don't want to remain weak. Please, teach me how to fight." Ingrid crossed her arms, lips thinning. I could almost hear her mind churning with doubt. I half expected her to dismiss me, to tell me to go back to scrubbing floors and stay out of the warrior's way. But she didn't. Instead, she jerked her head toward a corner of the field where a few novices were practicing basic stances. "Fine," she said brusquely. "Go stand with them. Don't expect special treatment. You'll have to work twice as hard to keep up." My relief was so overwhelming I nearly cried. I dipped my head gratefully. "Thank you." Stepping onto the field, I joined the novices' 2 teenage wolves who seemed startled to see me among them. Their gazes flitted to the guards posted nearby, who were watching me with cool detachment. But no one objected, so we began the simplest drills, balance stances, how to pivot on the balls of our feet, how to block an oncoming strike. My movements were clumsy at first, every blow jarred my arms, and my wolf howled in frustration at my lack of skill. But with each repetition, I started to improve, incrementally. Ingrid stalked around us, issuing sharp corrections. "Arya, bring your elbows in. Keep your shoulders down. Don't flinch if you flinch. You can't react properly." By the end of the session, my muscles screamed in protest, and sweat poured down my face. Yet, I felt a flicker of pride. I had pushed myself, done something outside my comfort zone. That night, as I lay in my cot, exhaustion mingling with the faint ache of bruises on my arms, Ember seemed more at peace than she had in a long time. I drifted into a deeper sleep, lulled by the notion that perhaps I wasn't doomed to be the pack's helpless punching bag forever. In the following weeks, I continued sneaking in training whenever I could. Between chores, I'd race to the training grounds and absorb as much knowledge as possible from Ingrid and the other instructors. My progress was slow, but steady. I learned how to throw a proper punch without hurting my wrists, how to sense the shift of energy when an opponent lunged. My wolf senses, though not as heightened as some, began to sharpen. I could smell aggression in the air, hear the faint intake of breath before a sparring partner made a move. Word spread that I was training, and predictably, the pack had mixed reactions. Some jeered, claiming I was delusional, that no amount of practice could elevate an Omega to a real fighter. Others watched with curiosity, uncertain whether to be threatened or amused. The guards remained ever present, though they kept their distance, no longer hovering as closely as before. Even Beta Marcus, who frequently passed the training grounds, seemed torn between mocking my efforts and letting me be. The only person who didn't react overtly was Lucian. He was everywhere and nowhere at once, holding pack meetings, reviewing territory maps, forging alliances with neighboring alphas, and drilling the higher-ranked warriors in advanced combat. Occasionally, I would sense his gaze on me as I trained, the weight of his scrutiny making my heart flutter. But whenever I turned to look, he was gone, or had turned his back. It was maddening, the way he seemed to be aware of my every move, yet refused to engage with me directly. Until one day, everything came to a head. Ingrid had agreed to let me spar in a low-level tournament the pack organized usually, a place for novice wolves to gain experience and show off their improving skills. It was nothing official, but it drew a decent crowd in the training grounds, curious to see who might stand out. I was terrified, yet determined. This was my chance to prove, if only to myself, that I had made progress. When the day arrived, my stomach churned with nervous energy. I was matched against a female wolf named Tanya, a beta-born who had been training since childhood. We stood in a ring marked by chalk lines on the grass, a small gathering of onlookers encircling us. My guards lingered near the edge, while Ingrid and a few others watched intently. The sky was overcast, a breeze ruffling the tall pines that bordered the grounds. Tanya gave me a quick once-over, a smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. "You sure you're in the right place, Omega?" she drawled. "Don't want you crying for your alpha when this gets too rough." Heat flared in my cheeks, and embers snarled in the back of my mind. "I'm here to fight," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. The referee, a senior warrior, raised his hand. "Begin." Tanya moved first, launching a sudden flurry of punches at my midsection. I managed to block the first, but the second clipped my shoulder, forcing me back a step. Pain shot through me, but I gritted my teeth and steadied my stance, recalling Ingrid's instructions. "Keep your center of gravity low, eyes on your opponent's torso." Tanya circled me, sneering. "Come on, Omega. Show me what you've got." I inhaled, ignoring the sting in my shoulder. When she lunged again, I sidestepped, knocking her arm away with my forearm. Surprising her, I followed with a quick strike aimed at her ribs. It connected, and she let out a grunt of anger. I heard a ripple of murmur from the spectators, but I couldn't afford to let it distract me. We traded blows, my smaller stature forcing me to rely on speed and careful blocks. Every successful strike against her felt like a small triumph, proof that I wasn't entirely helpless. But Tanya was more experienced and stronger. She landed several hits that had me gasping for breath. Bruises were surely forming under my thin shirt, and my left arm throbbed from absorbing repeated impacts. Sweat dripped down my forehead, and I blinked to clear my vision. Tanya's stance was still solid, her breath measured. She was enjoying this, reveling in my struggle. Ember howled for me to keep fighting. Gathering the last of my energy, I fainted left, drawing her guard away. Then I twisted my body and aimed a roundhouse kick at her side, hoping to catch her off balance. But she anticipated the move, catching my ankle mid-kick. With a cruel grin, she yanked me off my feet and hurled me to the ground. I landed hard, a whoosh of air escaping my lungs. Dazed, I tried to roll away, but she placed a foot on my chest, pinning me. "Better luck next time," she taunted, leaning her weight onto my sternum. Pain flared, and black spots danced in my vision as I struggled to breathe. Somewhere on the sidelines, Ingrid stepped forward, about to call the match. But before she could, a feral snarl echoed across the field. Suddenly, a strong hand clamped around Tanya's wrist, wrenching her away from me. The pressure on my chest vanished, and I coughed, gulping in air. Through watery eyes, I recognized Lucian's towering form. He shoved Tanya back with such force that she stumbled, eyes widening in shock. His own eyes blazed with an intensity I'd never seen Iris's, shifting to a glowing gold, canines elongated. He looked ready to tear into her for hurting me. Tanya froze, clearly uncertain whether to submit or defend herself. Around us, the crowd went utterly silent. My heart hammered as I realized what was happening. Lucian was openly intervening to protect me in front of dozens of pack members. He growled, voice resonating with raw menace. Back down. Now. Tanya's face paled. She raised her hands, palms out, a gesture of surrender. Alpha, it was just a spar. I didn't enough, Lucian snapped, every syllable laced with the power of an alpha command. No more. She bowed her head quickly, trembling. With that, the onlookers seemed to realize that the bout was over. Several turned away, uncertain, while Ingrid stepped forward to check on me. I gazed up at Lucian, chest still heaving, my body aching from head to toe. His features softened infinitesimally when he looked at me, the fury receding enough to reveal concern. Kneeling down, he wrapped an arm around my shoulders and lifted me to a sitting position. "Arya," he murmured, voice low, "you're hurt." I couldn't hold back a pained laugh. "That's how sparring works," I managed, wincing. He didn't seem amused. Scooping me into his arms, he rose to his feet, ignoring the hushed gasps and the sea of gawking faces. My vision swam, the pain from Tanya's final slam dragging me toward unconsciousness. As I drifted, I vaguely registered the shock in the eyes of our packmates and the triumphant, maddened pounding of my own heart. Despite the humiliation of my defeat, one fact burned bright in my mind. Lucian had leapt to protect me publicly, no less. When I came to, I was lying on a soft bed in what appeared to be Lucian's private quarters. The light filtering through the drawn curtains suggested it was late afternoon. My entire body felt stiff and sore, and my head pounded with each heartbeat. Slowly, I eased myself upright. The room was spacious and tastefully decorated. Dark wood furniture, a large bookshelf against one wall, and a private fireplace. For a moment, I couldn't believe where I was. Why would Lucian bring me here? Usually, injured wolves were taken to the infirmary. A noise by the doorway caught my attention. Lucian stood there, arms crossed, his expression guarded. "You're awake," he said softly. "How do you feel?" "Sore," I admitted, gingerly touching my bruised ribs. "But I'll live." He let out a breath, stepping further into the room. "Why were you sparring? I never gave permission for you to risk yourself like that." Anger flared in my chest. "I don't need permission to learn how to defend myself. I'm tired of waiting around for the next attack. I want to be able to fight back." His gaze flicked to the bruises on my arms, and for a moment regret tightened his features. "I can protect you," he said, voice strained. "You don't have to do this getting knocked around just to prove a point." I exhaled, letting my frustration tumble out. "Don't you see? I do have to. If I remain weak forever, the pack will never respect me. And how can I be your mate if I'm a constant liability?" He turned away, running a hand through his dark hair. "You wouldn't be a liability if I never claimed you." Pain lanced through me like a physical blow. "So that's still your plan to protect me from a distance while never acknowledging the bond publicly?" My voice trembled. "Don't you feel it, Lucian? My wolf aches for you. Every time you pull away, it's like being torn in half." His jaw clenched. "Of course I feel it," he admitted raggedly. "Every instinct I have is screaming to mark you, to keep you by my side, so no one can touch you. But I have responsibilities, this pack. Our alliances. They expect an alpha pair that can lead together without question. And yes, some of them have made it clear they won't accept an Omega as their Luna. I can't just ignore that." Tears burned at my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "What about me?" I whispered. "Do I have a say in this?" "You can always choose to leave," he said flatly, though his eyes flickered with pain. "I know it'll hurt, but if it's best for you." Rage burst through me, fueled by heartbreak. "You're unbelievable," I spat, pushing myself off the bed. I swayed, head spinning, but I stood my ground. "You can't stand to see me hurt, but you also can't bear to claim me. You want me to vanish so you don't have to make a choice." He didn't deny it. Guilt ghosted across his face. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping me. "I've been in your territory my whole life, and not once did I think about leaving. But you've pushed me so far, I might actually consider it." At that, his expression darkened, and something primal flashed in his eyes. He took a step closer, voice low and dangerous. "Don't say that." "Why not?" I challenged, even though my heart was hammering so loud I feared he could hear it. "If you won't have me, why should I stay where I'm despised?" He growled, the sound stirring the air. "Because I can't." His words caught in his throat, and in a single swift motion he closed the distance between us, grasping my upper arms with a gentle but unyielding grip. "I can't let you go," he finished in a rough whisper. Silence thickened between us, charged with tension. My cheeks burned from the proximity, my mind spinning. His hands on my arms sent jolts of electricity racing through my body. Despite all my anger and confusion, my wolf whimpered in longing for the closeness of our mate. Lucian's breathing was ragged, his gaze drifting to my lips for the briefest moment. Then, as if snapping out of a trance, he eased his grip, stepping back. Pain flickered across his features. I'm sorry," he said, voice just above a whisper. "I'm failing you, Arya, but I don't know what to do." My heart ached. I realized then that this fierce, imposing alpha was as trapped by circumstance and expectation as I was. The pack demanded a flawless leader. He was torn between duty and the instinctual pull of the bond. And I was at the center of the conflict, a living reminder of a destiny he wasn't sure he could embrace. Closing my eyes, I inhaled slowly, trying to steady my racing pulse. Maybe we can figure it out together," I offered tentatively. He looked at me, conflicting emotions warring in his eyes. For a second, I thought I saw a flicker of hope, but it was doused by uncertainty. He nodded stiffly. "Get some rest. We'll talk more later. I'll let you stay here until your bruises heal. No one will bother you in these quarters." His words acted like a shield dropping between us again, a reminder that though we shared a bond, we were still miles apart. I wanted to argue, to demand that he confront this dilemma once and for all. But I was exhausted, physically and emotionally. Instead, I sank back onto the bed, chest aching in more ways than one. Lucian lingered near the door for another moment, his gaze flicking over me as if memorizing the shape of my face. Then he left, the door shutting with a soft click. I stared at the wooden panel, shoulders slumping under the weight of conflicting emotions. Half of me was relieved he hadn't just turned me away or forced me back to the basement. The other half burned with a desperate yearning, an ache that threatened to devour me from the inside out. I wanted him to choose me not out of pity, not out of guilt, but out of genuine acceptance of our fated bond. My wolf whined in agreement. Yet the pack's disapproval and his own fears loomed like a chasm between us. How could we breach that gap? Could I ever be more than a burden in his eyes? A threat to the stability he'd worked so hard to build? And how long could I endure this half-life, bound to a mate who clung to me one moment and pushed me away the next? These questions circled in my mind as the daylight faded outside the window. I knew sleep would be elusive, overshadowed by the painful dance of hope and despair. But for now, I had to let my battered body rest. Pulling the sheets over myself, I closed my eyes, letting my mind drift into a fitful doze. Despite everything, one lingering thought kept my heart beating with faint determination. I'm not leaving. Not yet. I'll find a way to prove myself to become more than the Omega they dismiss. Because if the moon goddess had indeed chosen me for this bond, then there had to be a reason. I just hoped I was strong enough to uncover it before the pack's hatred or Lucian's indecision destroyed me entirely. I woke in Lucian's quarters the next morning, my ribs sore from the previous day's sparring mishap, and my heart still heavy with a swirl of conflicting emotions. The bed beneath me was larger and more comfortable than anything I'd ever slept on before, a reminder of just how different the Alpha's world was from my own. Even so, I couldn't fully appreciate the luxury. My thoughts traveled relentlessly to Lucian, his intense presence, his protective fury whenever I was harmed, and the unspoken pain in his gaze when he admitted he couldn't claim me yet. My wolf Ember whined softly in the recesses of my mind, sharing my turmoil. A soft knock on the door pulled me from my tangled thoughts. Sitting up gingerly, I winced as the bruises along my torso flared with protest. "Come in," I called, voice thick with sleep. To my surprise, the door opened to reveal Ingrid, the older Gamma who had been training me. She carried a small tray with a bowl of steaming broth and a chunk of bread. Her stern face was unreadable as she stepped inside, letting the door click shut behind her. "I figured you'd need breakfast," she said, placing the tray on a side table. "I also wanted to check on your injuries." My throat felt tight with gratitude. Slowly, I swung my legs over the edge of the bed. The bruises I had acquired from Tanya's takedown were no joke. Each movement reminded me that I'd been slammed into the ground. "Thank you," I managed. "I'm fine, just as stiff." Ingrid eyed me critically. "We're going to need to work on your ground defense. You held your own at first, but one slip cost you." She folded her arms. "You did better than I expected, though." A flitter of pride warmed my chest. Ingrid's praise was rare, so I knew she must have seen genuine effort in my fighting. Then again, the memory of how the spar ended with Lucian storming in and stopping, Tanya overshadowed the hint of accomplishment. "I didn't exactly win," I murmured, an edge of bitterness seeping into my tone. "You put up a fight," Ingrid countered. "That's more than most expected from you." Her gaze shifted around the room, taking in Lucian's personal possessions, a stack of books on his desk, the heavy drapes that blocked out the early light, the faint scent of him lingering in the air. Lowering her voice, she added, "The Alpha was furious when he saw you pinned like that. He nearly ripped Tanya apart. Took a lot to hold him back." I swallowed. My memories of that moment were hazy from pain and adrenaline, but I clearly recalled the thunderous snarl that had rocked the training grounds. "Doesn't exactly help my cause," I said softly. "I'm trying to show the pack I can stand on my own, but now they probably all think the Alpha will step in whenever I'm in trouble." Ingrid grimaced. It's complicated. A few are starting to see your determination, but others, especially those loyal to Beta Marcus, think you're just stirring up the Alpha's protective instincts to gain power. There's a lot of talk. I sighed, picking at the bread she'd brought. I wish I could make them understand I never asked for this bond, but I won't keep cowering. If I have to fight 100 times to prove myself, I will. Her eyes held a glimmer of approval. Good. Keep that mindset. Then she exhaled, frown deepening. But be careful. You don't want to push too hard. Too fast. I sense the pack's tensions running high lately. Some of them think Lucian is neglecting his duties by focusing on you. They wouldn't dare challenge him outright, but there are undercurrents of discontent. A chill ran through me. Even if Lucian was torn between claiming me and pushing me away, the mere suspicion that he was preoccupied with an Omega might provoke ambitious wolves to test his leadership. What do I do? Train. Heal. Keep your head on straight, Ingrid advised. The rest will unfold in time. She gestured at the bowl of broth. Eat up. You'll need your strength. I mustered a weak smile, touched by her concern. Despite her brusque manner, Ingrid had given me something no one else had an opportunity. The door to a more self-sufficient life had opened, and if I was careful, I might walk through it with my head held high. After she left, I ate the simple meal in reflective silence, each spoonful of broth warming me from within. Then I slipped out of bed and peeked around the room until I found a mirror, wanting to assess the extent of my injuries. Dark splotches marred my arms, hips, and ribs, each one a stark reminder of Tanya's superior strength. My reflection showed a mix of sadness and resolve. This was the price of learning. And if I wanted to truly protect myself, truly stand beside Lucian, whether he admitted it or not, I had to keep paying it. Just as I finished brushing my hair, the door cracked open again. This time, it was Lena peeking in, her cheeks flushed. "Arya, I heard you were here, and I thought—" She faltered, noticing I was up and about. "Oh, you're not sleeping?" "No, I'm okay," I said, trying to inject some brightness into my voice. "Ingrid brought me food. I was about to head out and, well, figure out where I'm supposed to be today." Lena's eyes darted around nervously. "I'm sorry to barge in. No one told me you were brought here until I overheard some guards talking. I wanted to see if you were all right." She hesitated, then asked in a hushed tone, "Does the Alpha know you're walking around? He can be pretty strict about rest." I bit my lip, caught between exasperation and a flicker of amusement. "He hasn't told me I'm a prisoner here, so I assume I can leave. The last thing I wanted was to hide away and let more rumors fester. Will you help me get back to my own clothes in the basement?" I gestured at the borrowed shirt. I still wore an old, oversized sweater that smelled faintly of Lucian. The thought of wearing his scent around the pack made my stomach twist with both longing and dread. Lena nodded, her expression earnest. "Of course. Let's go. We'll be quick." We navigated the corridors, burning shocked glances from a few wolves who saw me emerging from the Alpha's wing. I kept my chin high, ignoring the stares. My confidence was fragile, but I reminded myself that I had a right to move freely in my own home, no matter what others thought. Once we reached the basement, I let out a quiet sigh of relief. The familiar cramped space comforted me, in a strange way like a cocoon I knew, even if it wasn't luxurious or welcoming. Lena helped me find a clean set of clothes, a simple shirt and loose pants suitable for chores. As I changed, she busied herself making my cot tidier, as though trying to impart some normalcy. "How bad did Tanya hurt you?" she asked softly, glancing over her shoulder at me. I gingerly pulled the shirt over my head, wincing when the fabric brushed a tender bruise. I'll heal. Ingrid's training helped me last longer than I would have otherwise. A faint pride tinged my words, though the memory of being pinned still haunted me. Lena's mouth twisted in worry. The sparring ring can be brutal, and I heard Alpha Lucian was furious. He was, I murmured, recalling the moment he roared across the training grounds. Sometimes I wish he'd just let me stand or fall on my own, but I can't deny that. I trailed off, uncertain how to express the complicated brew of frustration and gratitude I felt toward him. It's comforting to know he's there. She nodded, giving me a look of understanding. Arya, if anyone can change the pack's attitude, it might be you. Just don't lose yourself in the process, all right? I forced a small smile and patted her arm, touched by her concern. I won't. I promise. That afternoon, I jumped back into my typical chores, refusing to let the gossip or my bruised ribs stop me. I carried laundry, fetched supplies, and scrubbed floors alongside the other Omegas, though I now moved with more caution, my torso aching whenever I bent over. Wolves in passing threw me curious or outright hostile looks, but I ignored them as best as I could. Within me, Ember paced nervously, longing to see Lucian, to reassure herself that he was near. Yet, I resisted the urge to seek him out. We both needed space, if only for a little while. By evening I was exhausted, physically and emotionally. My entire body felt heavier than usual, and not just from the bruises. It was the weight of scrutiny, dozens of wolves judging every step I took, every action I made. I found a quiet corner in the pack house's rear corridor and sank against the wall, pressing a cool cloth to my throbbing forehead. Voices drifted in and out from the nearby common area, and I caught snippets of conversation that made my heart twist. Can't believe the Alpha's coddling that Omega, probably just waiting until someone better comes along. Aye, if this goes on. Other packs will think we've gone soft. Their words pierced the thin armor of confidence I'd cobbled. Together, tears pricked at my eyes, and I closed them, inhaling slowly. I won't let them break me, I told myself, clinging to Ingrid's training and Lena's kindness, to Cade's unexpected support. The climb up from the bottom wouldn't be easy, but I refused to give up. Determined to distract myself, I stood up and walked outside into the crisp twilight air. The wide courtyard was lit by torches beyond it. The forest stretched in shadowy silhouettes beneath a silver moon. My wolf stirred restlessly, wishing for a run to clear our mind. Usually, Omega wolves weren't encouraged to roam the woods at night, but the idea of being pinned in made me feel trapped. I took a tentative step toward the forest's edge, fighting the pang of caution that always dogged me. Then, making up my mind, I slipped between the trees. The pine needles muffled my footsteps, and the air smelled clean, tinged with damp earth and decaying leaves from the previous season. Far away from judging eyes, I allowed myself a moment of solace. In the quiet hush, I closed my eyes, imagining what it might be like to truly bond with Lucian, to run with him under the moon. Would we race side by side, my small wolf dwarfed by his formidable form? Would he be proud of me for trying to improve, or irritated by the constant burden of my presence? I shook off the fantasies and pressed deeper among the trees, letting the canopy hide me from prying eyes. My injured ribs protested, but I found a log near a small clearing where I could sit and catch my breath. The gentle rustle of nocturnal creatures soothed me, a lullaby of crickets and distant owls. For the first time in days, I felt some measure of peace. Suddenly, A twig snapped behind me. Alarm shot through my veins. Spinning around, I found Beta Marcus emerging from the shadows. The sight of him made the hairs on my neck rise. Rarely did I ever see him without a retinue, or at least an audience. Right now he was alone, his expression as cold and severe as ever. "What are you doing out here?" I asked, trying to keep my tone even. My wolf was on high alert. Marcus had never hidden his contempt for me, and I knew his presence wasn't a coincidence. He stepped closer, the scowl etched deep on his features. "I should be asking you that, Omega. Wandering alone at night. Do you want to get yourself killed?" I fought the urge to shrink back. "I'm not hurting anyone. If I'm so worthless, why do you care?" His lips curled into a sneer. "Because the Alpha would lose his mind if something happened to you. And a compromised Alpha puts the entire pack at risk." A flash of anger lit my chest. "You'd blame me for that?" "I never asked him to." He cut me off with a growl. He was meant for greater things than being tied to a nobody. If we had a strong Luda perhaps, a beta female from a reputable family, the pack would flourish. Instead, he's too caught up in your existence to secure a decent alliance. Is that what you want? To see us weakened for the sake of your bond? My heart pounded, but I refused to back down. I want what's best for this pack, too. I'm trying to become stronger. To prove. Marcus scoffed. "You can't prove anything. You're an Omega. That's who you are, and that's all you'll ever be." He stalked closer, eyes glinting. "If you had any decency, you'd leave." Ember bristled, and my fists tightened. "Maybe I will," I retorted bitterly, echoing the argument I'd had with Lucian. "But I don't appreciate being threatened. I'm done being scared." Marcus's mouth twisted, as though he found my defiance both laughable and infuriating. "Your courage is misplaced," he said, voice low. "Because if Lucian doesn't reject you soon, I might have to step in." His implication was clear, and a cold dread spread through me. "You would challenge your own Alpha?" He gave a mirthless laugh. "I'm not a fool. I know how strong Lucian is. But the pack can't afford a weak Luna. If enough wolves lose faith in his decisions, something drastic will happen." His gaze swept me like I was a pest. "You wouldn't want to be around when that day comes." Terror and fury warred within me. Marcus was essentially warning me that the pack's dissatisfaction ran deeper than Lucian might realize. If push came to shove, they might try to overthrow him and I would be the scapegoat, the catalyst. "Why are you telling me this?" I whispered. He studied me for a moment, the flicker of the moonlight highlighting the cruelty in his eyes. "Because I want you gone," he said bluntly. "And I know Lucian's sense of honor won't let you slip away quietly. So it's up to you to see reason. Run, Omega, before you drag us all into chaos." Then, with a disdainful sneer, he turned and vanished into the darkness. I was left standing among the towering pines, my heart pounding in my throat. The forest no longer seemed tranquil. Shadows pressed in on me, laden with the weight of the beta's threat. "Leave," he'd said. "Run, before you drag us all into chaos." My mind spun. Could I truly abandon the pack? Abandon Lucian? The thought sent a jagged pain through my chest, and Ember snarled in protest. "We wanted to be recognized, to stand strong with our mate. But if our presence was fueling a potential rebellion, was it selfish to remain?" Conflicted and shaken, I hurried back through the trees, heedless of the branches clawing at my sleeves. My only thought was to reach the pack house, to find somewhere anywhere to think. By the time I slipped into the courtyard, my breathing was ragged, tears pricking at my eyes. All was quiet as I entered, my footfalls echoing on the stone. Most of the pack had retired for the evening. No one noticed me stumbling down the basement stairs, where I collapsed onto my cot, burying my face in the thin blanket. Long after the lamps above flickered out, I lay there, haunted by Marcus's words. If he was telling the truth, the pack's descent might already be too large to contain. Would they rise against Lucian, using me as the excuse? Would war break out with neighboring packs who saw us divided and vulnerable? And, worst of all, was I to blame for putting Lucian, my fated mate, at risk? Despite my determination to prove myself, I realized I was at a crossroads where no choice felt right. If I stayed, I might catalyze a rebellion. If I left, my wolf would grieve. A Lucian would potentially be consumed by the bond's pain. Neither fate seemed bearable. Eventually, exhaustion claimed me, and my dreams were fraught with images of howling wolves, snapping jaws, and Lucian standing on a battlefield, bleeding while I was powerless to help. I woke several times, heart hammering, but each time I returned to the same turmoil. Morning arrived without bringing me any peace. I was gathering my cleaning supplies the next day when Lena found me, looking pale and anxious. "Arya, there's trouble," she whispered, grasping my arm. My stomach dropped. "What's going on?" She glanced over her shoulder. "A neighboring Alpha, Branton, came for a visit. He arrived with several warriors, unannounced, and demanded to see Lucian. Something about renegotiating terms. Everyone is worried." A jolt of fear and curiosity coursed through me. Alpha Branton's pack was large and influential, rumored to be one of the most formidable. They'd been neutral allies with us for years, but if they perceived weakness in Lucian's leadership, they might seize the opportunity to strengthen their position or demand more favorable agreements. "Where are they?" "In the main hall," Lena said, voice trembling. "They just marched in. I had Beta Marcus usher them inside to wait for Lucian. It's tense, Arya. Some of the warriors say Branton is spoiling for a fight." My heart thumped. If Alpha Branton believed the rumors that our pack was unstable, he could exploit that. This might be a direct challenge to Lucian's authority, a test to see if he was truly the strong alpha everyone claimed, or if he was too distracted by the matter of an Omega mate to defend his pack's interests. "Thanks for telling me," I murmured, mind churning. Without giving Lena time to protest, I strode toward the main hall. Something compelled me to go, a combination of worry and a deep-seated loyalty. Regardless of our personal strife, Lucian was my mate, and I couldn't stand idle if he faced a threat. Approaching the doors, I slowed, pressing myself against the wall to listen. The thick wood muffled the voices, but I could make out Beta Marcus's clipped tone, and another voice unfamiliar and mocking. Then Lucian spoke, his words too low for me to parse. Even so, I recognized the edge in his voice, that lethal calm that came just before he unleashed his full power. Quietly, I slipped inside, staying near the edge of the large room. Several of our warriors lined the walls, their posture tense. On the opposite side stood Alpha Branton, a tall, imposing figure with dark copper hair and grey eyes that gleamed with cunning. He was flanked by at least 6 of his own warriors, each radiating well-trained confidence. Lucian stood at the center, arms folded over his broad chest. Despite his rigid stance, I saw the flicker of contained rage in his cobalt eyes. Beta Marcus hovered at Lucian's right, a fierce scowl carved into his face. "I'm not here to start a war, Lucian," Branton drawled, though his eyes glittered with cold amusement. "But word on the wind says your leadership has changed, that you've been preoccupied with personal matters." He let the last two words hang suggestively in the air, drawing quiet snickers from his warriors. Lucian's jaw tightened. "Any personal matters of mine are none of your concern," he said. Bren's smirk widened. "Oh, but they are, if they weaken your pack. We have long-standing trade agreements. If your position is compromised, well, maybe we should renegotiate, or perhaps find another pack that can offer us more stability and better terms." A ripple of tension moved through our warriors. Some looked ready to leap at Brenton's throat, but they refrained, sensing their alpha's authority in the room. Marcus's eyes flickered with hatred, but he let Lucian handle it. Lucian took a measured step forward, the cords of muscle in his neck standing out. "We remain strong," he said, voice a low warning. "Our treaties stand, as do our borders, unless you want to test them." Bren chuckled, unperturbed. "I hear differently. Word is that you've discovered your mate, yet you haven't claimed her, that you're at odds with your own beta over it. Such discord can't be good for your stability." My chest constricted. This was exactly the scenario Marcus had warned me about, an outside alpha sniffing around for signs of weakness. A wave of guilt swept over me as I realized I was indeed part of the reason for this confrontation even, if it wasn't by choice. Lucian's gaze turned lethal. "Careful," he said, voice rolling through the hall. "You're in my territory, and if you've come to mock me, or mine, then negotiations end here." Bren gave a theatrical sigh. "So touchy. But let me spell it out. My pack is expanding, and we need new hunting grounds. If your leadership is as shaky as the rumors suggest, we might be able to reach an agreement." He paused, relishing the tension. "In exchange for your continued independence, you could cede a portion of your southern forests to us." A hush fell over the room. I felt my blood run cold. The southern forests were vital to our pack. They contained prime hunting territory, not to mention farmland for the human settlement allied with us. Handing any part of that land to Branton's pack would cripple our resources. Lucian's fury was palpable, a roiling aura that made the air thick. "Get out," Lucian growled, eyes glowing, "before I make you." One of Branton's warriors made a derisive sound, stepping forward as if to challenge Lucian. In a flash, Lucian's beta had half-shifted, claws extending. Another ripple of aggression swept the room, both sides bristling. Branton lifted a hand, stopping his warrior. Now, let's not be hasty. If you think I'm bluffing, you're welcome to reject my offer. But you should know many packs are whispering that you've lost control. Once one pack moves against you, the rest might follow." Lucian looked poised to attack. His wolf hovered at the surface, barely contained. Every nerve in my body urged me to intervene, but I was just an Omega, standing on the outskirts of the hall. What difference could I make? Then Branton's gaze swept the room and landed on me. His eyes narrowed, as though he recognized something. "Is that her?" he asked, his tone faux curious. "The infamous Omega mate. Goodness, you're letting her skulk around your halls instead of at your side. That certainly speaks volumes." A few of Branton's wolves snickered. Beta Marcus growled, but Lucian's glare pinned him in place, forbidding him from responding. Rage and embarrassment fluttered in my chest as I stepped from the shadows. Every instinct told me to retreat, but something stronger, call it pride, or desperation, pushed me forward until I stood in the open. "That's enough," I said, voice steady despite the tremor in my legs. "You come into our pack with insults and demands, but you know nothing about us." Branton's eyebrows rose as though amused by my temerity. The Omega speaks, he drawled, eliciting a few laughs from his warriors. Blood thundered in my ears. I forced myself to keep going, looking directly at Alpha Branton. You think you smell weakness, but you've miscalculated if you believe this pack is divided. I turned to look at Lucian, whose eyes widened slightly with caution. We stand with our Alpha, I continued, raising my voice so it carried across the hall. Whether I am an Omega or not, I know that Lucian will never abandon his responsibilities. A murmur rustled among the onlookers. My gaze swept the faces, some scornful, some uncertain. I searched for any sign that I was making an impact, any flicker of unity in those who had once mocked or threatened me. Branton snorted, crossing his arms. Pretty speech, but I doubt your Alpha would risk war for the sake of an Omega he hasn't even claimed. For all we know, he might reject you tomorrow if it suits him. My chest constricted. The thought stung, but I refused to back down. That doesn't change the fact that this land belongs to our pack. We won't be bullied into giving it up. Branton sighed melodramatically and looked at Lucian, ignoring me once more. So, you're going to hide behind this scrap of a mate and claims of unity? Show me you're still the warrior everyone fears, Lucian. Prove it. He motioned to one of his men, who shrugged off his jacket and stepped forward. A challenge, Bren said smugly. A one-on-one spar. If your champion wins, we leave and won't demand any land. If we win, you give us a portion of the southern forests. Unless, of course, you prefer all-out war. The tension in the room rose sharply. Lucian's gaze flicked to the Branton warrior, a muscular, battle-scarred male exuding lethal energy. Then, almost imperceptibly, his eyes landed on me. I read the warning in them. Stay out of this. Beta Marcus's voice cut the silence. Enough with this charade. We owe you nothing I accept, Lucian said, his tone icy. Marcus's head whipped around in alarm. Alpha. Lucian lifted a hand, silencing him. One fight, but it's to submission or knockout. I won't risk my men's lives on your ego, Branton. Branton gave a theatrical bow. Agreed. He patted his warrior's shoulder. Deacon here was one of my best men during the border skirmishes last year. He's not lost a single sanctioned fight. My heart hammered in dread. If Lucian lost stand, I couldn't imagine him losing easily, but anything was possible. The consequences would be devastating. Our pack might be forced to cede vital territory or risk a confrontation they weren't prepared for. The entire pack house was silent, all eyes fixed on Lucian and Deacon. The two Alphas conferred briefly, then strode out of the main hall into the large courtyard, everyone pouring out after them. Torches flared in the evening wind, casting dancing shadows on the stone. Onlookers formed a loose circle, hushes of anticipation rippling through the crowd. My wolf trembled with anxiety, and I found myself standing behind some of our warriors, straining to see. Ingrid was there, looking troubled but resigned. Lena and Cade stood together, their faces pale. Lucian shrugged off his jacket, revealing the rippling muscles of his arms and shoulders. Deacon did the same, smirking as though this were a game. The onlookers pressed closer. My breath caught in my throat, and Ember bristled, wanting to leap forward and shield Lucian from any harm. A senior warrior from our pack stepped forward, as an unofficial referee. Rules are, no lethal strikes, but anything else goes. Fight until one yields or is unable to continue. Clear? Deacon nodded, rolling his neck. Clear. Lucian inclined his head, eyes glowing faintly with the telltale signs of his wolf. Yes. The warrior dropped his arm. Begin! Deacon lunged first, aiming a powerful strike at Lucian's jaw. Lucian pivoted fluidly. blocking and countering with a punch to Deacon's ribs. The impact resounded in the courtyard, and the crowd murmured approval. Deacon staggered but recovered fast, launching into a flurry of blows. Lucian's reflexes were honed. He dodged most of them, though a few connected, driving him back a step. My heart hammered as the two men circled each other, fists raised, muscles coiled. They traded blows, each testing the other's defenses. Deacon was skilled agile despite his bulk. He feigned a low hook, then slammed a brutal punch into Lucian's shoulder. Lucian grunted in pain, but retaliated with a crushing elbow to Deacon's sternum. Both men's knuckles were soon bloodied, their chests heaving. The tension crackled. Branton watched smugly from the sidelines, arms crossed, while Beta Marcus seethed, glaring at the rival Alpha. Around us, the pack's breath was collective, like a single living being. My nerves were strung tight, and I had to force myself not to step forward, not to cry out in alarm whenever Lucian took a hit. Then Deacon pulled a risky move. He dropped low, sweeping Lucian's legs out from under him. Lucian hit the ground hard. A collective gasp rose from our side. Deacon didn't waste a second. He launched himself onto Lucian, attempting to pin him. But Lucian's own wolf strength surged. He roared, twisting his body in a single powerful motion. Deacon was hurled off, landing in a sprawl a few feet away. The courtyard erupted in shouts. Lucian rolled to his feet, wiping blood from his lip. Deacon grinned, clearly enjoying the challenge, though he was breathing heavily. The next exchange was a blur of ferocious blows and their animalistic snarls. Lucian landed a savage strike that sent Deacon reeling, but Deacon rallied with a shoulder charge that slammed Lucian against a column. Stone cracked under the impact, and I winced, my hands clenching involuntarily. They grappled by the column, fists slamming into flesh, the night air echoing with grunts and growls. Slowly, it began to dawn on me that Deacon was pushing Lucian to expend more energy than usual. Each blow Lucian landed seemed a bit slower, each block more labored. Deacon, while battered, was controlling the pace, forcing Lucian to react rather than initiate. My heart sank. I'd never seen Lucian in a drawn-out fight before. He usually ended confrontations in moments. Could he handle someone with equal stamina? Suddenly, a well-timed punch from Deacon nailed Lucian across the jaw, snapping his head to the side. Lucian staggered. The crowd tensed, warriors on our side nearly stepping forward but halting when Lucian raised a hand in warning. Deacon took advantage of Lucian's daze, grabbing him in a choking hold from behind, thick forearm crushing Lucian's windpipe. I heard a strangled sound from Lucian, and fear seized my heart. Deacon's biceps bulged as he tightened the grip. Branton's warriors jeered, urging Deacon on. Our pack members watched with stricken faces, uncertain whether to intervene. My mind raced frantically. If Lucian passed out, we'd lose the challenge, and the pack's future would be in jeopardy. "Do something!" Ember screamed. "Help him! But what could I do?" I was an Omega, not a champion fighter. Even if I rushed in, it would violate the rules of a one-on-one contest, giving Branton cause to declare victory by default. Still, I couldn't just watch Lucian be strangled into submission. My wolf howled in desperation, urging me to find a way, any way to help. In a sudden burst of movement, Lucian drove his elbow back into Deacon's ribs, once, twice, 3 times with savage force. Deacon grunted but held the choke, refusing to relent. Lucian's face reddened, eyes bulging. A collective hush fell as everyone realized this could be the end. My heart pounded so hard, I thought I'd faint. Then, without warning, Lucian shifted part way. His eyes flared golden, fangs elongating, nails turning into claws. He raked at Deacon's forearm, drawing blood. Deacon yelped, reflexively easing his grip. That was all Lucian needed. He twisted and slammed the heel of his palm into Deacon's chin, snapping his head back. Deacon stumbled, and Lucian capitalized, landing a vicious series of blows on Deacon's torso and face. With a roar, Lucian tackled Deacon to the ground. The courtyard erupted in noise. One punch after another, Lucian's fists connected with bone-jarring impact until Deacon's movements became sluggish. Blood dripped from both men, smearing across the cobblestones. Still, Lucian didn't relent. Rage fueled him, a desperate need to claim victory. Finally, Deacon went limp, eyes rolling back as consciousness faded. Lucian sagged forward, panting, but he'd won. A ragged cheer went up from our side, while Branton's warriors looked stunned. Branton himself scowled, crossing his arms in frustration. Lucian struggled to his feet, half leaning on the column for support. His face was bruised, blood running from a cut on his temple, but a feral triumph burned in his gaze. "Yield," he growled, more to Branton than the unconscious Deacon. Branton pressed his lips together in fury, but his tone was forced calm. "Deacon is down," he said bitterly. "We'll leave, as agreed." At that, a wave of relief washed over our pack. The tension crackled a moment longer, and then Branton snapped, "Pick him up," to his warriors. They obeyed, hauling Deacon's unconscious form away. Lucian swayed, pressing a hand to his side where blood seeped from a gash. Marcus rushed forward to steady him, but Lucian shook him off, refusing help. His eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on me. In that instant, I saw the raw exhaustion and pain in his gaze, mixed with the fierce pride of victory. Relief overwhelmed me, and I fought the urge to run to him, to make sure he was all right. Branton paused as he began to depart with his men. He cast one last spiteful glance back at Lucian, then flicked his gaze to me. "This isn't over," he said softly, only loud enough that I could catch the threat in his voice. "Weak links eventually break." I shuddered. Then he and his warriors disappeared into the night, leaving behind an eerie hush in the courtyard. Slowly, the crowd dispersed, some with subdued excitement, others with fearful murmurs. No matter how victorious Lucian was, everyone recognized that Alpha challenges were on the horizon. Ingrid and a few others approached Lucian, helping him limp toward the infirmary. I stood rooted in place, uncertain if he wanted my presence. My chest ached with conflicting emotions, relief that he'd won, guilt at the knowledge that all this was partly because of me, and a fierce longing to be at his side, supporting him. Just as I was about to walk away, Lucian caught my eye. He inclined his head in a silent request. Heart pounding, I ventured closer. Marcus scowled, stepping aside with visible reluctance, but Lucian's authority was clear. "What are you standing there for?" Lucian rasped, trying to force a smirk through split lips. "Help me, Arya." His voice was weak, a far cry from the command and tone he usually had, but it still made my pulse leap. Carefully, I wrapped an arm around his waist, letting him lean on me. He flinched when I accidentally touched a bruised rib, hissing in pain. "Sorry," I murmured, guiding him forward. "Let's get you patched up." Marcus tried to intervene. "Alpha, let me assist ye." "No." Lucian cut him off, voice taut. His eyes flicked toward the beta in a glare that spoke volumes. With that one look, Marcus backed off, frustration twisting his features. Clearly, Lucian was drawing a line in the sand. He wanted me to help him, no one else. We half stumbled, half hobbled toward the infirmary, while the remaining wolves parted like a tide, giving us a wide berth. Some wore open curiosity on their faces, others disapproval, but in that moment, I didn't care. All that mattered was that Lucian was bleeding and hurting, and I was here to make sure he got care. As soon as we were inside the infirmary, I helped him onto a cot, ignoring the protests from the staff that they would handle it. He collapsed with a groan, his skin pale beneath the bruises. One of the healers, an older Omega who specialized in herbal remedies, moved to clean the wounds. I stayed by Lucian's side, my hand hovering near his. Once or twice I reached out to touch him, only to pull back in uncertainty. He let out a slow breath, eyelids drooping. I thought he might lose consciousness from the pain, but he managed to crack one eye open, focusing on me. "Arya," he whispered. "Yes?" I leaned forward, heart twisting. He licked his dry lips, struggling for words. "Thank you for stepping up, for not letting Branton belittle you." He winced as the healer dabbed at a particularly deep cut. "I heard what you said in the hall." Heat rushed to my cheeks. "I only told the truth. You're not weak, and this pack isn't going to roll over, no matter what rumors spread." His fingers curled around my wrist, a fleeting touch that sent electricity racing through me. "I won't let them hurt you," he murmured. Then his voice trailed off. Exhaustion claimed him, and his eyes slid shut. I watched him drift into a half-conscious state, tears burning in my eyes. Despite everything, he still wanted to protect me. Even if we were entangled in a mess of politics and rebellion, that simple statement of care felt like an anchor in a storm. The night wore on. I sat by his side, letting the healers do their work. Marcus hovered in the doorway once or twice, but I ignored him, focusing only on the sound of Lucian's breathing and the faint bond that pulsed between our souls. "Don't leave," Ember whispered inside me, her voice laced with desperate certainty. "We need him, and he needs us." I had no idea what tomorrow would bring. I feared the retribution of other packs, the anger of our own wolves, and the threat lurking behind Marcus's gaze. But for now, I was here, and Lucian was alive. My heart whispered that maybe, just maybe, we could face the chaos together even, if it meant defying every expectation the pack had for an Omega and an Alpha's bond. Lucian spent 3 days recovering in his private quarters, surrounded by various healers and loyal warriors who ensured no further threats materialized during his vulnerability. Word of his victory over Deacon spread throughout the territory, quelling some immediate fears of an outside invasion. But the mood within the pack remained uneasy. The challenge from Alpha Branton had highlighted the underlying tension, revealing that other packs were watching our every move, waiting for a sign of genuine weakness. During those 3 days, I tried to keep a low profile both, to avoid stirring up more gossip, and to give Lucian space to heal. I returned to my usual chores, ignoring the pointed stares of some wolves who whispered that I'd contributed nothing while the Alpha nearly fought to the death. Others, the more neutral or curious ones, asked me timid questions about the fight or offered sympathy for Lucian's injuries. Ingrid encouraged me to continue training, though she kept the sessions light given my own bruises and the need for the pack's morale not to be disrupted by another scandalous spar. I practiced simple drills until sweat drenched my clothes, grateful for the sense of purpose it gave me. But at night, my thoughts always drifted to Lucian. I wondered if he lay awake, hurting, thinking about the pack's future, worrying over alliances, My wolf itched to see him, to feel his reassuring presence. Yet I didn't dare intrude without an invitation. Part of me feared his reaction. What if he still insisted on pushing me away, even after everything? On the fourth morning after the challenge, a guard approached me while I was folding laundry in a cramped storage room. "The Alpha wants to see you," he said shortly, avoiding my eyes. My heart lurched, nearly skipping a beat. I set aside the linens and wiped my hands on my trousers. "All right," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The guard led me through the corridors, tension in his posture. I gathered he didn't like being assigned to escort an Omega, but an order from the Alpha was not up for debate. When we reached Lucian's private quarters, the guard stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. The door opened to reveal Lucian sitting in a chair near the window, propped up by cushions. Though still pale and bruised, he looked far better than he had right after the fight, his posture more upright, his shoulders still broad with an Alpha's quiet strength. A tray with half-eaten food rested on a side table, alongside a scattering of parchment documents, and the faint smell of healing salves lingered in the air. "Come in," he said, his voice lacking the raw edge of pain it once held. "Close the door behind you." With the guard shutting us in, no doubt, standing right outside, I crossed the room and paused a few feet away. My chest tightened at the sight of Lucian's injuries. A patch of gauze was taped along his temple, and bruises still marred his arms. Yet his eyes were clear, cobalt ringed with quiet intensity. "You wanted to see me?" I asked, attempting to keep my tone neutral. He studied me for a moment, then nodded at a nearby chair. "Sit." "I do as he asked," hands clasped in my lap. Silence stretched between us, weighted and uncertain. Finally, he exhaled, eyes flicking to the documents on the table. "This is a risk," he said quietly, "calling you to my chambers again. The pack is still stirred up after Branton's visit. Any sign that I'm distracted could worsen matters." A pang lanced through me, but I met his gaze. "Then why did you call me here?" His jaw flexed. "Because I'm done pretending I don't need to see you." Heat flared in my cheeks. Ember perked up in my mind, letting out a quiet yip of surprise. After so many days of dancing around each other, the words were both startling and painfully welcome. "Lucian." He raised a hand, cutting me off gently. "Let me finish. This pack was my life before I ever knew I had a mate. I still place it first in my priorities, but that doesn't change the fact that you calm something in me, Arya, even when I'm denying our bond. It never fades." My heart thumped so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "So what does that mean?" His gaze dropped to the floor, as though wrestling with 1,000 conflicting thoughts. "You've heard the rumors, Beta, Marcus's resentment, Branton's attempt to exploit me. They hinge on the idea that an Omega mate makes us vulnerable." He paused, struggling for the right words. "I need to prove them wrong. We need to prove them wrong." I gripped the edges of the chair, a mix of trepidation and determination flooding me. "I'm trying, Lucian. I'm training every day, getting stronger. But it's going to take time before the pack sees me as anything more than an Omega with a target on her back." He looked up, eyes dark with resolve. "I want to help you, not just by shielding you from attacks, but by giving you a chance to show your worth. If you can earn the pack's respect, it'll weaken Marcus's influence and send a clear message to Branton and the others." A flurry of emotions seized me: hope, fear, excitement. This was what I'd wanted, for Lucian to acknowledge that we had to face the problem head on. but I also sensed the enormity of the challenge ahead. How? I asked, voice quiet. How can I prove myself on that scale? He took a slow breath, wincing at the ache in his ribs. In a month's time, the pack will hold its annual gathering hour biggest festival, where allied packs are invited to celebrate the harvest and reaffirm bonds. It's an important event, one that carries weight in how we're perceived regionally. I nodded. I'd heard of the gathering, though I'd never been allowed anywhere near it in previous years. Omegas usually worked behind the scenes, ensuring everything was perfect for the higher-ranked wolves and their guests. This year, Lucian continued, I plan to name a new set of official ranks. We've had some shifts in leadership, and the festival is the traditional time to announce changes or promotions. He paused, a shadow of concern in his eyes. I could introduce you formally as my mate, but if the pack rejects that announcement, it could spark chaos. We need to show that your presence strengthens the pack, not weakens it. My throat went dry. You want me to do something meaningful? He nodded, reading my anxiety. Perhaps the caretaker role among the Omegas could evolve into something else. An Omega who organizes, leads, and ensures the festival runs smoothly. If you can demonstrate leadership skills in this domain, it might make them see you differently. I blinked, half in surprise and half in dawning realization. The gathering was massive food, ceremonies, dancing, pack-run traditions, and lots of socializing with visiting wolves. Coordinating it was no small feat. Usually multiple betas oversaw each segment. An Omega leading it would be unheard of. But if I succeeded, it would speak volumes about my capabilities. Lucian searched my face. You don't have to accept. It's a lot of responsibility. And if anything goes wrong, Marcus and his ilk will seize the chance to blame you. Fear churned in my stomach, but something deeper, something hungry for growth rose to the surface. This is it, Gumber urged. A chance to stand tall. I'll do it, I said, a determined tremor coloring my voice. I'm not guaranteeing perfection, but I'll do my best. A faint smile touched Lucian's battered features, a flicker of genuine warmth I'd rarely seen. Thank you, he said softly. I'll make the necessary announcements. Of course, I'll have warriors and some betas on standby, but you'll be in charge of coordinating the Omegas and seeing to every detail. I want them to follow your lead. The idea made my knees feel weak. Me, an Omega, giving directions to other Omegas and, perhaps even to wolves who outranked me in daily life felt surreal. But I swallowed my doubts. If I wanted a place beside Lucian, this was the crucible in which I had to prove my mettle. All right, I whispered. I won't let you down. He exhaled, relief evident in his eyes. Leaning back in his chair, he pressed a hand to his side, wincing. I need to rest, he murmured, fatigue tugging at the corners of his voice. But before you go, let me say one more thing. I waited, heart in my throat. I know it's not enough. Not yet, he said, voice hushed. But thank you for standing by me, even when I've been distant. Warmth blossomed in my chest, and I reached out hesitantly, lightly touching his hand. The contact was brief, electrifying. Ember practically purred with contentment. I'll always stand by you, I said, no louder than a whisper. We're mates after all. He nodded once, eyes slipping shut as exhaustion pulled at him. Sensing he needed rest, I quietly rose, left the chamber, and closed the door behind me with a gentle click. Outside, the guard shot me a hard, suspicious look, but I ignored him, heart thrumming with cautious exhilaration. The following day, Lucian made a formal announcement to the pack. In preparation for the gathering, Arya, formerly an unranked Omega, would oversee all logistic arrangements, from the feast to the ceremonial decorations. Any direct defiance or sabotage against her instructions would be treated as insubordination. This declaration stunned the entire pack. Whispers spread like wildfire, rife with confusion, skepticism, and outrage. Some wolves demanded to know why an Omega was being given such authority. Others speculated that Lucian was testing them. A few like Lena and Kada seemed hopeful, quietly offering me congratulations and promises of support. Beta Marcus, however, reacted with calculated disapproval. He didn't openly contradict Lucian's order he wasn't suicidal, but I felt his cold glare on my back whenever we crossed paths. It sent shivers of apprehension down my spine, yet I forced myself to stay resolute. The caretaker, Elira, was among the first I needed on my side. Her job was typically to manage the pack house staff, but with Lucian's announcement, I was now expected to coordinate both the caretaker and the other Omegas. When I approached her in the kitchens, she looked me over with narrowed eyes. "So now you're in charge," she said, her tone borderline disrespectful. "Will you be giving all the orders from that fancy new pedestal?" I bristled, but I kept my voice calm. "I just want to work together. You know more about the kitchens and housekeeping than anyone else. I'll need your expertise to ensure everything for the feast is perfect." She snorted, crossing her arms. "You think the other Omegas will just line up and obey an Omega who's suddenly calling herself a leader?" I took a slow breath. "I'm not calling myself anything. The Alpha gave me this responsibility, and I intend to carry it out. I can't do it alone, though. If you help me, I'll make sure we have enough resources to lighten everyone's workload, maybe even arrange extra breaks or better shifts for the Omegas." That caught her attention. For all her prickliness, Elira was fiercely protective of her staff's well-being. She regarded me with a critical eye, then muttered, "Fine, but if this fiasco blows up, I won't cover for you." I offered her a small, grateful smile. "That's all I ask. One down, countless others to go." Organizing the gathering meant not only coordinating the pack house staff, but also the hunters, the decoration committee, the caretaker for the ceremonial bonfire, and the logistics for welcoming allied packs. Every day was a whirlwind of planning sessions, inventory checks, cleaning schedules, and arguments. I lost count of how many times I had to remind older wolves ones used to bossing me around that I was acting on the Alpha's orders. Sometimes they laughed in my face, especially the more volatile betas. But a firm mention of Lucian's directive, and the implied consequences of ignoring it, usually brought them to begrudging compliance. Still, the tension was palpable. I worked tirelessly, often from before sunrise to well after midnight, forging small alliances with the wolves I sensed were more neutral or open-minded. Lena became my unofficial assistant, helping me keep track of lists and schedules. Ingrid lent me advice on dealing with stubborn warriors who resisted being directed by an Omega. Cade helped transport goods, and also discreetly warned me when he heard malicious whispers about me. All the while, Beta Marcus observed from the sidelines, quiet but ever-present, occasionally insinuating that I was overstepping or that certain tasks should be handled by real leaders. I forced myself to remain polite, mindful that an open confrontation would only fuel his narrative. "But inside," Ember growled, itching to challenge him for the disrespect. I calmed her, reminding her we had bigger objectives. In the midst of the chaos, I hardly saw Lucian. He was busy recovering from his injuries while also managing the broader political ramifications of the upcoming gathering. Rumors flew that other Alphas might emulate Branton's challenge if they suspected any sign of weakness. Lucian was shoring up alliances, strengthening patrol schedules, and instituting tougher training regimens for our warriors. Though we were physically under the same roof, it felt as though our worlds barely intersected, each consumed by pressing duties. Yet, sometimes late at night, I sensed him near my basement cot, a faint shift in the air outside my door. Once or twice, I thought I caught the sound of footsteps, pausing, then receding. Part of me yearned to open the door, but a stronger part recognized he was wrestling with his own demons and needed to find some measure of peace in this arrangement. Days blurred into nights, and the gathering loomed closer. My personal training with Ingrid became sporadic there, simply weren't enough hours in the day. But whenever I had a free moment, I'd practice the stances and drills she taught me, not wanting to lose the progress I'd made. One afternoon, a little over a week before the festival, I was standing in the main banquet hall, inspecting the arrangement of tables with Lena. The space was cavernous, high ceilings adorned with rustic beams, and large windows letting in natural light. We had to accommodate visiting delegations from at least 5 allied packs, not to mention our own. The decorations were still scattered around the edges of the room, waiting to be placed. Lena scribbled notes on a parchment. So, we'll have the main table up here for the Alpha and his highest-ranking wolves. That includes Beta Marcus. Then we'll have side tables for the allied Alphas and their close advisors. I nodded absently, mind already racing ahead to the serving logistics. We'll need extra staff for the drinks. Maybe we can rotate between the Omegas so no one is overwhelmed. She beamed at me. That's a great idea, Arya. Everyone's exhausted. But this plan will share the burden. The door creaked behind us. I turned, half expecting to see one of the kitchen staff with a question. Instead, it was Beta Marcus, arms folded, brow etched with disapproval. My spine tensed reflexively. Lena stepped back, swallowing, her grip on the parchment tightening. Beta, I said, keeping my tone cordial. Can I help you with something? He glanced around the half-decorated banquet hall. So this is your grand vision? He asked, sounding unimpressed. Have you considered that the allied packs might see this arrangement as a slight if they're not seated close enough to the Alpha? I tried to maintain calm. I've assigned seats based on prior protocols. Allies with stronger ties to our pack are seated closer to Lucian. It's a common practice to reflect levels of closeness and respect. His gaze flicked to Lena, who was trying to disappear into the background. Leave us, he ordered curtly. Lena gave me a worried look, but I nodded, signaling her to comply. She scurried out, parchment clutched to her chest, leaving me alone with Marcus. My wolf bristled at the tension crackling in the air, yet I stood my ground. What is it you want, Beta? I asked, bracing myself for whatever barb he'd sling. He strolled closer, footsteps echoing on the polished floor. You're wasting your time playing at being in charge. Not even if you pull off this gathering. It won't change who you are, an Omega, who's dangerously out of her depth. I forced my expression to remain neutral. We'll see, he huffed. You think Lucian will parade you around as his Luna after one little festival? He's using you, Arya, to placate you and keep you from leaving. But mark my words, once the gathering is over and the alliance is secured, he'll see sense. He'll publicly reject you so that the pack can have a real Luna. A surge of pain lanced my chest at the idea, but I refused to show weakness. You underestimate the bond we share, Marcus sneered. No, you overestimate it. Look around. Is he here by your side, praising your efforts, Telling the pack you're his future? No. He's off doing what an alpha does, handling actual leadership tasks. You're just a convenient diversion from the real issues. Anger flared in me, and Ember growled. Lucian asked me to do this, Beta. Yes, to keep you occupied, Marcus cut in. He knows you'd scuttle around, believing you're accomplishing something, when really you're just cleaning a bigger mess than usual. The only difference is that now everyone sees your failure in real time. His words sliced deep, dredging up my own insecurities. But I refused to let them derail me. Why are you telling me this? You've made it clear you despise me. Wouldn't you be thrilled if I failed? His eyes glinted. I would be, except that if you fail in front of allied packs, our pack's reputation suffers, and then we all lose. I can't allow that. He stepped even closer, and I could smell the faint tang of aggression rolling off him. I'm giving you a chance to back out. Step down. Tell Lucian you can't handle this. Then he'll assign someone else a beta or gamma who knows what they're doing, and our gathering won't be a humiliating disaster. I clenched my jaw, my hands curling into fists at my sides. I won't quit. For a moment, pure rage flickered across Marcus's face. Then he smiled, a cold, predatory thing. Suit yourself. But when the inevitable chaos ensues, don't expect mercy from me or from the rest of the pack. They'll be baying for your blood. He turned sharply and strode away. I stood rooted to the spot, chest heaving, tears of anger burning behind my eyes. Don't let him shake you, I told myself, breathing through the wave of anxiety that threatened to swallow me. He's doing this because you threaten his power. Arya? Lena's voice trembled from the doorway. She peeked in, eyes wide with concern. Are you okay? I swallowed hard, blinking back the tears. I'm fine, I lied. Let's keep working. The rest of the day was a blur. I drifted from one task to the next, coordinating deliveries, finalizing seating charts, and ensuring the cooking staff had all the ingredients they needed. Every so often, Marcus's warning echoed in my mind, fanning my hidden doubts. By the time darkness fell, my muscles throbbed, and my emotions were raw. I made my way to the training grounds, hoping to catch Ingrid for at least a brief session to clear my head. Sure enough, she was there, overseeing a handful of young warriors practicing late-night drills. Though I was bone-tired, I approached her with a determined set to my jaw. Spare some time? I asked quietly. I need to vent some frustration. Ingrid studied me, noting the tension in my shoulders. Grab those pads, she commanded, gesturing to a set of punching pads leaning against a wooden post. 5 minutes of combos, then we'll talk. Grateful for the instruction, I strapped on the pads and let Ingrid guide me through a series of strikes. She would call out commands, and I'd swing or jab, rotating my hips to generate power. Each impact jarred my arms, but the physical exertion acted like a release valve for my pent-up anger. Images of Marcus's mocking grin fueled my punches, and I found myself snarling under my breath as I struck. After the set, I was gasping for air, sweat dripping down my temples. Ingrid motioned me to remove the pads, then handed me a canteen of water. I assume your day was rough, she commented dryly. I took a grateful gulp, water trickling down my chin. Marcus, he's trying to convince me to step down from organizing the gathering. She arched an eyebrow, crossing her arms. Why? I recounted our conversation in the banquet hall, my voice trembling with residual anger. Ingrid nodded occasionally, lips pressed thin. He's scared you might actually succeed, she said once I finished. Marcus is a beta who's invested in tradition. He can't fathom an Omega, especially the Alpha's mate, pulling off something so public and demanding respect because of it. I sighed. I just want to do my job, but the pressure keeps mounting. She studied me with a hint of sympathy. Pressure is the crucible where strong wolves are forged, Arya. Keep your focus. Don't let that man's poison seep into your head. Her gaze flicked over the gloom-shrouded training grounds. We can do some more drills if you like, but it's late. You should rest. I was tempted to train until I dropped, just to quell the swirl of negativity in my mind. But she was right. I needed rest to function tomorrow. Thanks, I murmured, offering a small smile. I appreciate it, Ingrid. She gave a curt nod, then dismissed me to return to her watch over the young warriors. I headed back inside, muscles quivering from fatigue. The corridors were quiet, most wolves already asleep or in their private quarters. As I neared the basement stairs, I paused, a strange pulling sensation making the hair on my arms stand up. Lucian, Ember whispered inside me. The bond seemed to hum, guiding me away from the basement and down another hall. Confused but intrigued, I followed the faint tug until I came to the door of Lucian's office, which was cracked open just enough for light to spill out. I heard voices inside, Lucian's low baritone and Marcus's sharper tone. My chest constricted. I knew I should walk away eavesdropping on an alpha and beta was dangerous, but their conversation drifted through the gap in the door, compelling me to listen. As to stop coddling her, Marcus was saying, frustration evident. The pack grows restless. They question your judgment in letting an Omega run the gathering. Lucian's voice was hard. I'm not coddling her. She's working tirelessly to prove herself. If you had half her dedication, maybe you'd dare. Marcus interrupted with a snarl. Insult me all you want, but facts remain. Wolves are talking. If she fails, our alliance is jeopardized, and so is your position. You might have won against Deacon, but no single fight will keep other alphas at bay if they smell uncertainty in our own ranks. A tense pause. Then Lucian spoke, quiet but firm. Let them talk. When she succeeds, they'll think twice. A harsh laugh from Marcus. You're pinning the pack's future on an Omega's success? You're gambling with all our lives. She's not just any Omega, Lucian hissed, voice brimming with suppressed fury. She's my mate. Marcus's retort was cold. A mate you haven't claimed. When will you mark her, Alpha? After she's run into the ground by all these responsibilities? Or are you waiting for her to snap under the strain so you have a reason to reject her without blame? Silence. My heart thudded painfully, tears stinging my eyes. That was the question that haunted me at night, did. Lucian secretly hoped I'd fail so he could walk away without guilt. Finally, Lucian answered, voice tight. I don't want her to fail, Marcus. I want her to be the Luna this pack deserves. But the goddess knows I can't force it on her. She has to earn the acceptance of the wolves who despise her rank. And I still have to reconcile my own doubts. Marcus's tone turned mocking. Perhaps you should pick a she-wolf from a beta family as a placeholder. Let this Omega vanish quietly. Then you can keep the bond a secret, or claim it was a mistake. A loud crash sounded, and I realized Lucian must have slammed his fist, or a heavy object against something. Get out, he snarled. Before I do something we'll both regret. I pressed myself against the wall, heart pounding. Moments later, Marcus stormed out, Rage coiled in every line of his body. He didn't notice me in the shadows as he stalked away, muttering curses under his breath. When the hallway fell silent, I exhaled shakily. My wolf urged me to go in, to comfort Lucian, but doubt clogged my thoughts. He had said he wanted me to succeed, that he believed I could be the Luna. Yet he also admitted to doubts. I felt both relief and sorrow swirling, an emotional tempest I struggled to contain. Steeling myself, I took a step toward the office door, then hesitated. Ultimately, I decided not to intrude. Lucian was already on edge, grappling with an insolent beta and the heavy burden of leadership. Barging in might only worsen his turmoil. So I retreated, heading to the basement with a heavy heart. I curled up on my narrow cot, mind replaying the conversation. At least he'd defended me, refused Marcus's suggestion to replace me with a beta female, but the mention of his doubts left me raw inside. "We'll prove them wrong," Ember whispered, but even she sounded uncertain. The next week passed in a blur of last-minute preparations and restless nights. Each day brought new challenges. A late shipment of decorations, a near disaster with some of the ovens in the kitchen, tensions flaring among certain young warriors who questioned whether they should even attend a festival while the pack's future felt uncertain. Through it all, I persevered, leaning on Lena and Cade, following Ingrid's guidance on diffusing conflicts. The caretaker, Alira, proved surprisingly helpful once I showed appreciation for her knowledge. Bit by bit, tasks clicked into place, though I often felt as though I was juggling flaming torches, praying I wouldn't drop any. Finally, the morning of the gathering arrived. The entire pack house bustled with frantic energy cooks preparing elaborate meals, Omegas scurrying to set the long tables, warriors posted at all entrances to greet or repel visitors. My nerves were a tangled knot, but I kept moving, barking instructions in a voice I barely recognized as my own. The allied packs arrived throughout the day, welcomed by designated escorts who led them to guest quarters. My heart thumped each time an unfamiliar presence filled the corridor, a constant worry in the back of my mind that one of them might be here to stir up trouble or test our strength. Thankfully, the mood remained civil. Even Alpha Branton sent a small delegation, though he himself was conspicuously absent. As dusk approached, the feast in the banquet hall kicked into full swing. Torches cast a warm glow across the polished floors, and the air buzzed with conversation. Plates piled high with roasted meats, vegetables, and bread circulated among the tables. From my position at a central post, I watched carefully, ensuring that every guest was served promptly, that the music played at just the right volume, that no corner of the hall went ignored. Lena dashed around, checking on the table settings, while Cade managed the incoming supplies from the kitchen. I hardly had time to think about Lucian. He was seated at the main table, deep in conversation with various visiting alphas and betas, presumably discussing alliances and territory concerns. I caught sight of him occasionally, his expression composed and authoritative. A pang filled me each time our gazes almost met, but I couldn't dwell on it. I had a job to do. At one point, Ingrid approached me, a wry smile on her face. "No major disasters yet," she said over the din of the crowd. "Congratulations." I gave a shaky laugh. "Thanks. Let's hope it stays that way." She nodded, then looked past me, her expression flickering. "Heads up, you might need to intervene." I followed her line of sight and saw a small commotion near one of the side tables. A handful of our pack warriors were arguing with a visiting beta from another pack. Alarm spiked through me. If a fight broke out now, In the middle of our carefully orchestrated festival, it could undo everything. Ingrid clapped me on the shoulder. "Go handle it, coordinator. Show them what you can do." My stomach clenched, but I squared my shoulders and forced my legs to move toward the brewing conflict. A cluster of onlookers had formed around the table. I slipped through them, hearing raised voices. "They told you these seats were reserved for my people." "And I told you that you can't just kick us out because you don't like being near an Omega Run event." I squeezed through to the front and took stock of the situation. Two of our warriors, bristling with indignation, faced off against a beta from a neighboring pack. This beta was tall and lean, his expression twisted in annoyance, and behind him stood a few companions trying to defuse the situation. "What's going on here?" I asked, raising my voice as firmly as I could manage. All eyes snapped to me. The beta's lip curled. "They're crowding our table," he said, gesturing to the two warriors. "We were told this side was reserved for our pack, but these buffoons claim it's open seating." I glanced at our warriors. One of them was Jonah, the same male who attacked me before. He stared at me with open disgust. The other was a female warrior named Sonia. She lifted her chin. "We were just taking a short break. No one told us these seats were off limits." My pulse hammered. This kind of territorial spat was trivial, but it could escalate if either side felt disrespected. Carefully, I drew in a breath. "All right, let's calm down. There are extra seats at the table by the eastern wall. We can easily accommodate you. There's no need to fight over a couple of chairs." The visiting beta pinned me with a stare. "So you're the Omega who organized this. Why am I not surprised there's confusion?" My cheeks burned at the insult, but I forced a civil tone. "These warriors didn't receive the memo. That's on me. Let me fix it." I turned to Jonah and Sonia. "Could you please move to the other table? It's only a short distance away, and it'll keep the peace." Sonia hesitated, looking uncertain but not hostile. Jonah, on the other hand, shot me a glare of pure loathing. "You want me to give up my seat for these foreign betas?" he snarled. "I'm part of this pack. I shouldn't have to move." My heart jumped. Conflict with a visiting beta was bad enough. Having a rebellious pack member openly defy me was worse. If I let him remain, the visiting beta would see it as disrespect. If I forced Jonah to move, he might escalate the situation. Tension crackled in the air, the onlookers sensing a potential showdown. Ember bristled inside me, urging calm dominance. "Jonah," I said, trying to keep an even tone, "I'm asking you politely, as the coordinator of this event. The Alpha has decreed that my decisions here stand. Let's not cause a scene." He stood up slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "You really think you can boss me around just because Lucian said so?" His voice dripped with contempt, loud enough for onlookers to hear. "This is still my pack. You're just a stray Omega playing at leadership." A low rumble of interest coursed through the small crowd. The visiting beta folded his arms, seemingly amused by the internal dispute. My heart hammered as I recognized that Jonah was testing me, trying to provoke a collapse of authority so everyone could see I couldn't keep order. "Stand your ground," Ember urged, adrenaline flooding my veins. I squared my shoulders, meeting Jonas's glare head-on. "I'm not asking you to leave the gathering. Just this table. Right now you're obstructing our guests, and that reflects poorly on the pack. If you have an issue, take it up with the Alpha. Otherwise, comply with the event coordinator's instructions." Jonah's lips peeled back from his teeth in a silent snarl. For a moment, I feared he'd physically attack me right then and there, but an uneasy hush had fallen over the onlookers, and I sensed they were watching to see whether I'd crack. My wolf senses pricked. I could smell the anger radiating off Jonah, but also his uncertainty. He was cornered. If he struck me, the Alpha's wrath would be immediate. Finally, he scoffed, eyes flicking to the visitors. "Fine," he spat. "Enjoy your seat, Beta, and your inflated ego." He stalked away, Sonia trailing behind with a worried glance. The crowd began to disperse, muttering among themselves. The Beta offered me a condescending grin, like he found the exchange entertaining, then returned to his seat. Shaken but relieved, I stepped aside, letting my breath out in a rush. That could have gone so wrong. My heart still pounded, adrenaline coursing in my veins. But I'd stood my ground, avoided a scene, and maintained composure. I turned to go back to my station, but my gaze caught on Lucian standing across the hall, half hidden by a cluster of people. He had watched the entire interaction, eyes unwavering. When our gazes met, a slight smile curved his mouth, softening the normally rigid line of his jaw. A rush of warmth flooded me, and Ember wagged her tail in delight. Despite the swirl of chaos around us, that single moment felt like a thread of intimacy binding us together. He saw, he approves. The realization tightened my throat with unexpected emotion. Unable to linger, I resumed my duties, quelling the tremors in my hands. Over the next hour, I made rounds, addressing minor complaints, guiding late arrivals to seats, and calming any further tensions with a polite but firm hand. Although exhaustion tugged at every muscle, I pushed through, determined to ensure the festival succeeded. Finally, near midnight, the event wound down. Many guests moved outside to gather around a ceremonial bonfire where they would sing ancient songs of unity under the moonlight. Others drifted to private conversations or to the smaller lounge areas. My job, for the most part, was done. The staff would handle cleanup, but the main feast had concluded without a crisis. I stood at the edge of the now mostly empty banquet hall, surveying the remnants of the night. Plates and cups littered the tables, leftover food waiting to be cleared, decorations slightly askew from the revelry. A wave of relief washed over me. No brawls had broken out, no major fiascos. Even the occasional tension had been managed. Letting out a shaky exhale, I stepped into the corridor, the cool night air drifting through an open window. That's when I saw Lucian approaching, still limping slightly from his injuries, but holding himself with the dignified confidence of an alpha. My heart fluttered, nerves tingling. He stopped in front of me, his eyes a tumult of emotions. "You did it," he murmured, voice threaded with admiration. "No one can deny you organized this gathering successfully." Emotions swelled in my chest. "There's still some cleanup, but yes, I think it went well." He took a step closer, so close I could feel the warmth radiating from him. My wolf trembled in anticipation. "I watched how you handled the disputes, how you coordinated everyone. You were remarkable." My cheeks heated, and I glanced away shyly. I had a lot of help. He lifted a hand, gently tipping my chin so I had to face him. His touch was electrifying, soft yet commanding. In that moment, it felt as if we were the only two wolves in the pack house. "I'm proud of you, Arya," he said, voice low and earnest. "Proud to have you at my side." A lump formed in my throat. We'd come a long way from the day he refused to even look at me, from the nights I wondered if he'd reject me outright. Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them back. "Lucian, He bent his head closer, lowering his voice. "Tonight, I want to show the entire pack what you mean to me." if you'll let me." My heart stuttered. I knew what he was implying, a public acknowledgement. Claiming me as his mate, perhaps even marking me. Ember yipped excitedly, her tail swishing in my mind. But uncertainty lingered, remembering how Marcus's words had haunted me. "Are you sure? The pack they might—" He silenced me with a gentle finger against my lips, his eyes carrying a fierce resolve. "They'll adapt. I've seen enough to know you can handle their scorn and earn their respect. I won't delay this any longer." Heat flared in my core, and my voice wavered. "Then yes, I want that." A genuine smile graced his bruised features. "Good. Come with me to the bonfire. I'll introduce you as my mate to our allies and to our own pack." The finality of that statement sent my pulse racing. In a blur of happiness and nerves, I let him guide me through the corridors and out into the open courtyard. A gentle wind stirred the flames of the bonfire, around which a sizable group of wolves gathered, some from our pack, some from visiting packs who remained. Laughter and chatter filled the night as the moon shone brightly overhead. Lucian's fingers twined with mine in a warm, reassuring grip as we approached. Heads turned at our arrival, the conversation ebbing. I glimpsed Lena's face lighting up with a grin, Ingrid nodding with approval, and Cade giving a satisfied smirk. Others, like Jonah and Marcus, watched with guarded suspicion. My heart thundered in my ears. Lucian raised his free hand for silence. The flames crackled, illuminating his face with flickering shadows. "Tonight," he began, voice carrying effortlessly, "we celebrate our alliances and our shared bonds. In the spirit of the moon goddess's design, I want to share something with all of you." A hush fell over the crowd. I trembled inside, but Lucian's grip steadied me. He gently tugged me forward, so we stood in full view of everyone. A few gasps rose, likely from those who had guessed what might be happening. Beta Marcus stood at the edge of the firelight, jaw clenched, gaze scorching with resentment. Lucian continued, "For too long, there have been rumors about my mate. Some doubted the goddess's choice. Some questioned my decision to keep her at a distance." He glanced around, unwavering. "But as Alpha, I choose to honor our Banta recognized Area as my fated mate. She has proven her dedication to this pack, her strength in adversity. If any wolf questions her worth, know that I stand by her, and any challenge to her is a challenge to me." A wave of chatter rippled through the gathering, some audible cheers mixing with murmurs of disbelief. Tears blurred my vision. Lucian was openly claiming me, standing against the tide of tradition that said an Omega couldn't be Luna. He turned to me, eyes shining in the firelight. "Arya," he said softly, "just for me to hear. I would mark you if you'll have me. Here, where our pack and the goddess can witness." My heart fluttered wildly. Ember howled in joy. This was the moment we'd feared might never come. With tears slipping down my cheeks, I nodded. "Yes, Lucian, I want that." He pulled me into a gentle embrace, one hand sliding up my neck to cup the base of my skull. My breathing hitched as his lips brushed the sensitive area where my shoulder met my neck. Then, in a flash of exquisite pain and pleasure, I felt his canine sink into my flesh. A gasp escaped me, but I gripped his arms, letting the bond flare through every nerve. Heat flooded me as our connection ignited, something primal and ancient weaving our souls together. A ripple of awe swept the onlookers. They could sense the bond solidifying, the mingling sense of alpha and mate sealing into an unmistakable unity. Time seemed to stretch, my entire being ablaze with the bond's power. When he withdrew his teeth, I panted softly, my hand rising to the fresh bite mark. It throbbed, but the pain already receded under a wash of euphoria. Lucian gazed into my eyes, his face alight with something akin to wonder. "All my life, I've carried the pack's expectations," he murmured. "But from now on, I carry them with you. I don't regret the goddess's choice." My throat was too tight for words. Instead, I leaned in, brushing my lips to his in a tender kiss that felt like a promise. A few scattered cheers broke out among the crowd. Lena's voice, Ingrid's gruff approval, maybe even some reluctant applause from those who realized resisting now would only isolate them from their alpha. But not everyone rejoiced. As we broke apart, I caught sight of Marcus. Fury twisted his features, his hands clenched into fists. He turned sharply and disappeared into the darkness, a silent oath of future opposition. Yet, at that moment, I couldn't bring myself to care. Because Lucian had chosen me. And for once, I felt the weight of acceptance press around me like a warm cloak, banishing the cold loneliness I'd known all my life. We were far from done. Conflicts would arise both within the pack and without. But I was no longer alone. The bond between Alpha and Omega, once deemed impossible, had become our greatest source of strength. And I intended to prove that no matter one's rank, love and determination could upend any hierarchy and forge a new path toward a future neither of us had dared to dream possible.